across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of Common Sense. Thank you, Julia. She's back, of course, on Monday. Lots to get through in the programme today. The battle lines being drawn over immigration. PM Keir Starmer plans a legal crackdown on migrants exploiting the right to a family life, while Tory leader Kemi Badenoch aims to bring back a Rwanda-style scheme. Meanwhile, Reform say, don't trust any of them. We've got it sorted. Who do you trust on immigration? It might sound like an obvious question, but ponder it for a moment and have a real think about who could realistically make the difference. Details in a few moments. Also today, mental health sick days have surged by 5 million in just 1 year, with a record 20.5 million lost to stress, anxiety and depression in 2024. What is going on? Are we all super duper depressed, or are we just every now and again feeling a bit down? It's that distinction that nobody really wants to identify. And Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to U-turn on winter fuel payments, proposing to claw back costs from millions of better-off pensioners, but through higher taxes. Oh, man alive, what a great world we are living in right now. Thanks, Rach. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note there as well. And 87222 if you want to send a message through. Here's the thing. Anyone remember the 2010 election? You remember the build-up to the 2010 election? We had Nick Clegg for the Lib Dems, David Cameron for the Conservatives, and then the Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, for the Labour Party. And the big theme back in 2010, of course, was austerity. And interestingly, they all agreed, sage-like, that the country was in a perilous mess. The financial crash of 2008 was indelibly locked into all aspects of UK life and would be for years, some said decades. The wannabe prime ministers all nodded along and they collectively agreed that austerity wasn't just the best way forward, it was the only way forward. It was just a case of who could be more austere. You remember those conferences they did and the panel shows they did in the build-ups? Trust me, said Nick Clegg, I'm the Lib Dem, I'm the only one who have the answer to this. And then Cameron would chime in, I agree with Nick, which became a bit of a catchphrase, but he would say, we need to go further, we need to go faster. And then Gordon Brown would chime in and ponder the points before telling a worried nation that he was the only leader that knows what prudence, remember that, really means. I'm the only person that can be trusted on austerity, said dear old Gordon. And they spent the best part of every interview making very similar points. Austerity was very much the word of the day. So right now, here we are. We might be 4 years away from an election, but it doesn't feel like that. The major parties seem to be in full-on electioneering mode as they jostle for the airtime to make their very sensible points. But austerity has been replaced. Immigration is now the undisputed word of the day. The cast, however, has changed. The Lib Dems simply don't feature. Does anyone even know their position on immigration? Does anyone even care about their position on immigration? They do have 70-odd MPs. We tend to forget this. Who is this ghost party that sort of just sit there on the green benches, anonymous on a weekly basis? Labour and the Tories are there, and of course Reform now. Considering they only have 5 MPs, talk about punching above your weight, they are the ones making the difference. Between the three, they're the ones battling it out, and Labour have fired a starting pistol today by set to bring in new laws curtailing the use of European Human Rights Convention by foreign criminals. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is drawing up legislation to make it easier to deport overseas offenders as well as failed asylum seekers. The new bill will contain measures designed to restrict the use of the right to private and family life. This is Article 8 at the moment under the European Convention of Human Rights. I get this sense, by the way, that trying to negotiate your way out of the European Convention of Human Rights on a kind of cherry-picking basis, we'll have that bit, but not that bit, is a bit like trying to do the Brexit deal. We'll go, well, we'll have all that, but we don't want any of... No, it's that or nothing, mate. I'm not sure you can get away with that. Don't be too confident, however, because Yvette might have what she considers to be a whole new approach for Labour, but coming down the tracks, and here she comes, you can see her in the distance, getting larger as she approaches. It's Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader. She's going to unveil tough plans to revive a Rwanda-style deportation scheme and vows to withdraw Britain from any international treaties that stand in the way. That kind of stops short of specifically identifying the ECHR. Maybe tomorrow when she speaks on this, perhaps she will do. In that speech, she will say a Conservative government would reintroduce measures to bar illegal migrants from claiming asylum in the country and deport them to a third country. Meanwhile, Kemi, Yvette, don't you start getting too confident, because look, yonder, over the hills, coming over, it's the man himself, like a cowboy with his leg cocked across a big old stallion. Here comes Big Nige. You almost want the good, the bad and the ugly music at this point. He says, look, you two are full of false promises and I've got the receipts to prove it. It's as simple as that. Only Reform UK will genuinely and finally act. I mean, they speak with a very different backstory. They cannot be accused of ineptitude or inaction because they haven't been there. But they speak very loud, very proud about what they would do with immigration, both legal and illegal. Now, bearing in mind, when it came to the crunch, back to 2010 now, and austerity, it doesn't always pan out quite like this. Yeah, right, we were going to do this, but now we're in power, we've seen the books, and we realise that it's actually quite hard, and changing policy doesn't happen. It's like turning an oil tanker around these kind of... I don't know why it is, but it is. And these things take time. What we thought was possible isn't quite as doable as we first considered, and this may be something we're in for the long haul. So would even Reform UK? Can you see it? Day one, Prime Minister Mr Farage standing there at number 10. We're stopping the boats. Bang. Tomorrow. It will change to over the course of this Parliament. We will attempt, and you see the problem. So when you hear big words from politicians and parliamentarians, I think the default position for all of us, and I genuinely believe this is a good an intelligent approach to politics, is to always be sceptical, no matter who the party is. Always sit back and go, OK, so that's what you're saying. What is doable? What are you likely to, in reality, achieve? What will you really implement in this area? So you might be thinking only Reform are the party for me, but could the Tories be the ones that finally get the message? Could it even be that Yvette Cooper, man alive, I know this sounds a bit daft to many of you, could Yvette Cooper be the one that actually comes up with the goods as she renegotiates the entirety of the European Convention on Human Rights and all of its elements connected to this particular area? Who do you trust on immigration? You might say the Lib Dems, by the way, and if you do, I'm all ears. I'd love to know what their policy is. I don't imagine they have one. But let's take it as we see it. The Conservatives, Labour, Reform UK. Which of those three do you really believe, will deliver? Let's get a word on this from Oscar Redrup, former number 10 advisor to Boris Johnson. Oscar, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. How are you doing?
Very good. Nice to have you with us. We've got a load of stuff to talk about here, of course. Let's start with the subject that I raised there a second ago. Labour drawing up new battle lines to tackle immigration. Kemi Badenoch set to unveil tough plans to revive a Rwanda-style deportation scheme. Nigel Farage saying this pair don't know what the heck they're talking about. I'm the only person you can trust. It's worth having a listen to the Defence Secretary, John Healey. He was speaking earlier this week. He was doing the rounds, as the phrase goes, and he was talking and asked about this question of immigration. Here's what the Secretary of State said.
Pretty shocking, those scenes yesterday. Truth is, Britain's lost control of its borders over the last 5 years, and the last government last year left an asylum system in chaos and record levels of immigration. I think yesterday tells us a really big problem, which is you've got French police unable to intervene and intercept the boats when they're in shallow waters. That means we saw it. We saw the smugglers launching elsewhere and coming round like a taxi to pick them up. Now, one of the steps, and this is a complex problem, but one of the steps we've now got is the cooperation, new cooperation with the French and an agreement. They'll change the rules so the police can intervene in the water as well as on the shore, and that will help to make a difference.
John Healey. So there it is, Oscar, a new approach from Labour, and part of that is to also renegotiate, one assumes, Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights. Genuinely not sure you can just do that if you choose, but they seem confident. Yvette Cooper says this right to a family life lark is not fit for purpose anymore, although that's not the only issue, of course, facing the government. Kemi Badenoch tomorrow is talking about reviving a Rwanda-style scheme. Nigel Farage looking, blowing into his pistol, as it were, saying, no, 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 I've got the measure of you two. Only I can sort this. Who do we trust?
Well, I think the general public probably trust neither any of the three parties. And you're right to, in your opening gambit there, to reference that we do have 70-odd strong MP strong Liberal Democrat Party that no one has any idea what they think of on immigration policy. But look, I mean, the battle lines have been drawn. I think if you really wanted to shrink it down, you have the reform pirate ship, if you like, who I think probably naturally people believe a little bit more on this issue because their leader, for one, Farage, has been talking about illegal immigration in particular for decades. In terms of the Conservatives and the Labour Party, you have, if I was to really simplify it, you have a Labour Party who think they can bring about the change the public want on this issue by playing by the rules as they are currently set. And you have a Conservative Party who I think now finally, and probably should have been done a little bit earlier in the day, who are now saying, actually, we probably have to rip up and change a few of these rules if we really want to put a stop to illegal immigration. So if I would say to the public, who do you trust on that? Do you trust the Labour Party can, tackle it by upstreaming, by pleading with the French? Or do you trust the Conservative Party, who are saying that actually, maybe we need to break the system apart a little bit here, and we need to think about things like leaving the ECHR? Because, I mean, and again, without being too kind of simplified on it, I mean, do we really think the French are going to chuck us a bone here and help us out?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's borderline laughable. It was only a couple of weeks ago that that we gave them access to our French. We gave the French access to fishing, to our fisheries for the next decade. And I can't remember the name, but a French MP only this week was basically laughing in our faces, saying in terms of immigration, it's our problem. It's our fault. We're seen as a soft touch, is the quote. So if we're banking on the French, then I think we're going to be bitterly disappointed.
Well, at the moment, of course, as you were rightly alluding to there, Oscar, this seems to involve anyone at the French end who's so much as dipped their toe into the water is kind of, oh no, they're already in. Sorry, it's not our job anymore. It's like, hang on a second, we've literally seen the footage of these people, and you can see it on the screen for those watching on our channel. They're literally paddling in the water. There's no one's on a boat. No one's like 2 miles out to sea, let alone getting anywhere near Dover. And this is where the French are going, that's way too dangerous for us to intervene at this. But I mean, this is absolute nonsense.
Yeah, but look, let's be real about it. From a French perspective, I get it. I mean, why do they want to solve this problem? It's anything. It's helpful. It's like they have no skin in the game on it. It's entirely. Issue. It's entirely something that ultimately is affecting this country. And I mean, the idea that now the Labour government feel like they've done this really, glossy, impressive deal with the French. I mean, I would love as I'm sure many people would, I would love to be proven wrong on it. And if this really does crack it, and it really, after all these years, finally solves the problem, I will come on the show and I will congratulate the Labour government. But it just feels like pie in the sky.
It really does. And I also, from the Tory perspective, and I mean this kindly, I think if Kemi Badenoch was perhaps a different kind of communicator, then she might get away with saying, look, we messed it up. We didn't address what we need to address. Rwanda had some good things, very expensive. Behind the scenes, I happen to know it wouldn't have probably fully worked, but there's a version of it that will. Come with me on this journey and sound kind of like the person you'd meet in the pub, or a bit like Nigel Farage.
Indeed, but that could be another within the battle lines and the dividing lines on this issue that, fortunately, in many ways, all major parties, except the Lib Dems, are recognising is the number one issue for so many people in this country. So that's a positive. The window in that sense is shifted because this issue has been ignored for so long. But even within those battle lines, there's another one, which is that and this is a guess, but there's a lot of potential that the Conservatives have the message, the correct detail and the correct message on this issue, yet they don't have the correct messenger. Whereas Reform, as it currently stands, probably have the correct messenger. But I think a lot of people aren't quite seeing the level of detail. And, it's fair enough from Reform. They probably don't need to overextend and over. True. But we don't really have the detail on it. And yes, we believe their authenticity. Yes, if Reform are to actually fulfill the promise of the polling that they currently see, then they're going to have to get their illegal immigration plan absolutely belt and braces completely sorted. But at the moment, we don't have it. We just don't. And I'm sure strategically there's a reason for that. But people, I think, will start to get a little bit sick and tired, actually. And they'll go, look, I don't like the Labour Party. I don't like the Tories that much. But at least they're giving me detail, they're giving me plans, and I might not agree with them, and I might think they don't stand a hell of a chance of actually making any difference. But at least they're taking that time, whereas I'm not actually getting that from Reform at the moment. Yeah, and there's a lot to get into, hence the question we're asking, who do you trust of those three parties that are the ones that are currently battling it out on this one? Oscar, stay with us. Oscar Reddrop, former number 10 advisor to Boris Johnson. He knows a thing or two about trying to get things into action and the difficulties and the impenetrable walls you come up against when you're there. You can say a lot in opposition, but when you get the big job, who would do it? I mean, if you had Kemi Badenoch, who I think is serious about this, and I don't dispute that Kemi Badenoch was part of a government that weren't serious enough about this, but could she really make a difference? Is Kemi Badenoch's ideas, as we are about to hear over the next day or so, are they actually more realistic than Nigel Farage? Nigel Farage's sounds certainly are more emotive. It gets you thinking. It gives you that feeling in the pit of your belly. Here's a man that's in command of this one. He knows what he's doing. But has Badenoch, oddly, got the better plan or the more realistic plan? Who do you trust? If it was Reform, if it was Labour, if it was the Tories, specifically on immigration? I mentioned 2010 when austerity was the big battleground. Today, here we are 15 years on, but 4 years away from a general election. It feels like someone's already fired the starting pistol on electioneering. I'm expecting leaflets through my door. And immigration seems to be central to what they are all talking about. Who's going to take this ground? Who will be able to hoover up this particular area of policy? Is it Kemi? Is it Nigel? Is it Keir? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Betty had found out that she wasn't going to get the £300 winter fuel allowance that she relied on to keep her home warm and to heat herself through the cold months. So you went round, as you did every day, and you found her literally frozen to death. Unbelievable.
Dharma said about the last government, before he got in, that Tories would say that there's 4,000 people going to die of the cold this winter. Well, he's beat that target by 4,950.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This in from Paul. He says, I haven't done the sums on this, but if we deport illegal migrants on day one, we could put that money saved into apprenticeships and reskilling rather than bringing in legal migrants to do it. So you kind of feed the system from that. I mean, it's put like that. It sounds very simple, although Paul does concede he hasn't done the sums, and that I think that's, to be fair, Paul, don't panic about that, because lots of politicians haven't done their sums, but they're good on headlines and they're good on emotion, and it sells pretty well on the doorstep. But who's telling us the truth? Who do you trust on immigration? Labour, Tories or Reform? We've got Oscar Redrop with us, former number 10 advisor, looking at this and the other big stories of the day. We'd be failing, Oscar, if we didn't bring in this one, of course, Rachel Reeves and her plans to restore winter fuel payments for 10 million pensioners before snatching back funds from wealthier recipients through higher taxes. Let's have a listen to Keir Starmer U-turning on his original decision to scrap the winter fuel allowance.
As the economy improves, we want to make sure people feel those improvements in their days as their lives go forward. And that is why we want to ensure that as we go forward, more pensioners are eligible for winter fuel payments. As you would expect, Mr. Speaker, we will only make decisions we can afford. That is why we will look at that as part of a fiscal event.
I mean, it was horrible. Sort of, you had to sit behind a cushion listening to that, Oscar, to be honest. You know, we're only doing this because, you know, as the economy improves. I don't think there's any sign that the economy has improved. And even if it had improved on one measure to this degree, this is a U-turn. They cocked it up, they got it wrong, they misread the room, and now they're backtracking.
That's exactly right. It's a screeching U-turn. Hey, I'm not gonna, you know, they certainly happened in my time. They will always happen in politics, and you know how you manage a U-turn often is like sooner the better. This has dragged on. They've kind of politically hemorrhaged blood on this for months and months and months and months now, and it cut through. Not everything in politics. I mean, actually, to be frank, very little of Westminster politics and policy cuts through. But my God, this really cut through. Yeah. And as you said, you know, trying to somehow frame this U-turn as an improving economy is borderline. I mean, no, it is just insulting the intelligence of the British public when they can quite clearly see that they haven't got more money in their back pocket and the economy is not upticking. And that's not why this U-turn is happening. It was entirely political.
Indeed. And of course, it was made worse for many people because Labour were the party that would say this is the kind of thing that's, you know, that's in their DNA to do this, not to get rid of it. That's what the wicked Tories do. And they sold that message so often on the doorstep that many, you know, almost half of the backbench Labour MPs had been photographed holding a sign saying, you know, your winter fuel allowance is safe with us, as they went into the election last year and then literally voted to get rid of it. So it wasn't just the physical money disappearing from people who really needed it, but it was the sort of just the stench of utter hypocrisy around it too.
Completely. And I think there is and in some ways it's a reality, is that a Labour government can get away with crueler stuff than a Conservative government can. And I think they probably banked on that with the initial announcement. And I think, if I'm honest, if we go uber political here, I think a lot of pressure internally, I think from people like Angela Rayner and people who are close to her, and she has a lot of support in the party at the moment. And we saw Andy Burnham doing the media rounds quite recently. And huge personality on that. I think a lot of pressure a lot of pressure has contributed internally to this U-turn. But look, there's still a ton of uncertainty on it. They haven't even cleaned up the U-turn quickly and efficiently and moved it on. You know, there will still be people who lose out. This strict threshold in place is still going to hack a hell of a lot of people off. And it was just completely, I mean, this, like, in fairness to them, it pains me to say it, they weren't left with a lot of good stuff when they came into power, just, you know, about a year ago now. But this was and so there was always going to be pain. There was always going to be pain. And people might not want to hear that. I'm not defending the Labour government, but because they want results almost instantaneously. But this was an unnecessary own goal.
Yeah.
And the other unfair thing sometimes about politics that I think the Labour government will learn in this is that if you take that long to U-turn and that initial kind of, you know, damage sets in, even when you do U-turn, people, you know, they're not going to get any credit for this.
100%. 100%. That's the...
Sorry, so even on their own terms, even if there was a public argument to be made for doing the cruel thing here, they're not going to get any credit for that because they held firm, and they're not going to get any credit for being kinder and more reasonable on doing this U-turn. So it's a complete double loss. And that political antennae that Keir Starmer just quite clearly doesn't have on issues like this. That's what really, really shone through him.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd love to have been in the room when this was first suggested. I mean, it would have been a jaw-dropping moment, one would assume, when someone said, so you want to get rid of what? We're the Labour Party, for God's sake. We don't get rid of this stuff. We introduce this stuff. But there it is, and there it sort of remains, and it's sort of coming back, but slightly richer people will pay for it, which ultimately is what happens with every area of life, I guess. Final one here, Oscar. We'll have to be brief on this, but mental health sick days soared by 5 million in just a year. Brits took around 20.5 million health sick days in 2024. Why are we getting more stressed, anxious and depressed? What is going on?
Well, Labour government. Sorry,
It's as simple as that.
No, look, so I'm really split on this. I am someone who, you know, millions of people have suffered with, you know, a couple of various mental health problems over the years. I think when things are really, really acute, there should be support there. You know, acute mental health illnesses can be just as damaging to the economy as physical. However, I think that balance, that seesaw, if you like, has gone far too far the other way. And I think there are so many, and you know what? To be really blunt about it, work is really can be really powerful and as a really brilliant tool for people with mental health problems.
Yeah.
That purpose and structure, and the more we can move people, and this is a big task for the Labour government. The more we can move people into that way of thinking, I think the better. We can't afford that as an economy. I know a lot of people my age who. I wouldn't say use it, but I think a lot of people my age and the generation under maybe they can hide with it. Mental health problems can make you feel like you need to hide. And I think we had a government that talked about the opportunities and had a real vision for the economy and younger people. It would really, really help. It really, really help people. So I'm relatively sympathetic on this issue, I have to be honest, but the balance has tipped far too far.
Indeed. Listen, great stuff. Oscar, thank you as ever. Oscar Redrop. He's former senior advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. So he knows what it feels like to have those crash and burn moments, the peaks, the troughs, those moments of political euphoria, and then, oh, God, it's all gone to mush, etc. It ain't an easy job. No one ever thought it was. Interesting one, though, right? The tales you could tell. Thank you to him for his views. It is a fairly obvious question on a day like today, but I can't resist asking who you trust on immigration. There is a nuance to the question, because I know many of you will just instinctively go, well, it's got to be Nigel Farage and reform, right? Now, they're untested. They're saying a lot of things. It's very seductive stuff. Could Kemi Badenoch actually have the greater plan here? When we look at what she's going to speak tomorrow in full on this and put the meat on the bones, we already know the broad brush of the direction of travel. We know what Labour kind of think they stand for, which is not a lot, but even they're up in their game. This is all down to reform, by the way. But of the three, think about this. Who would you trust to get it right? We're going to talk to three voices Somebody from the Labour side, the Tory side and the Reform side. Jonathan Liss, Kevin Foster, Chris Farmer, all joining us next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
It is Talk, 25 to 2. Lots to get through. We'll come to more of your comments in a moment. Lots of you say I don't trust anybody on immigration. Natasha says we don't really have a choice about which party we trust over this issue. As socialists, Labour will do absolutely nothing as they believe in it and don't really care about the country or its citizens. Tories have had a chance for years and absolutely blew it. So we're left with Reform. And while I don't agree with everything Farage says, I do think he is patriotic and will try and do something about immigration. So he's got an advantage and a disadvantage. He's got an advantage in that he hasn't got a backstory to show any kind of failure, whereas you could point to the Tories and go, well, look, there it is. There's the evidence. They blew it. And Kemi Badenoch was part of that gut. You could do all of that. And Labour, they've been in office and numbers have gone up. You could point to that. Whereas Farage, it's a clean sheet of paper. However, there's a danger, a downfall with a clean sheet of paper. You can promise anything. Does it survive scrutiny is the big question. Lots to get through here. We know it's become a bit of a battle line. 4 years before an election, Labour is to introduce new laws limiting the use of the European Human Rights Convention by foreign criminals. This is the Article 8, the right to a family life. Not sure whether they can do that. I'm also not sure whether that is the only hurdle in the way of all of this. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper is preparing legislation to make it easier to deport overseas offenders and failed asylum seekers. Does that really touch the sides? Meanwhile, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch plans to unveil tough measures to revive a kind of Rwanda-style scheme, deportation scheme, and promises to pull Britain out of, her words are quite careful here, promises to pull Britain out of any international treaties that block efforts to do so. In a moment, Chris Farmer, Reform UK member, also Kevin Foster, you may remember Kevin, former immigration minister for the Tories, also former Tory MP for Torbay. First, Jonathan Liss, political commentator and all-round good old-fashioned lefty. Is that fair, Jonathan? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I'm not sure I'm good old-fashioned lefty. I'm not a communist. If that's what you mean, like an old-fashioned.
Really? We've been given false information here. Well, I said we've been given false information here. Good to have you with us.
You're saying to me enough times to know that I'm on the left. I'm
Indeed.
not sure if I'm good or old-fashioned.
Absolutely. Listen, so here it is. The battle lines, curiously, and you've been around the block enough to know this, kind of weird, isn't it? 4 years away from an election, and here we are having three parties who are definitely electioneering on the point of immigration.
Well, I think that one party is terrified of another party, and that's really what's driving this. Obviously, Labour is terrified of the Farage rise, And they are adopting a very curious response to that, which is to direct all of their messaging at a group of people who will never vote for them. If you are so vexed by migration that you're going to vote for Nigel Farage, there is nothing, literally nothing, that Labour could say, in my opinion, that would make large numbers of that cohort.
But they're trying, aren't they? They're giving it a go, Jonathan.
When you can vote for the real thing.
They're giving it a go. Yvette Cooper making all the noise about this.
Of course they are, but I think it's completely the wrong approach. Obviously, I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I'm on the left, and I think migration is generally a good thing. But what they are trying to do is they're so scared of the people who are going over to reform that they are completely ignoring and indeed alienating their own base, the people who currently vote for them, by sort of chasing reform votes who are not going to peel off. So I think it's a really bad strategy.
But have Labour missed a trick here? Could they look? It's a government's job to have a civilised and decent immigration policy. We all agree with that. Legal immigration is one thing. People hopping over the channel on boats. You know it. I know it. You won't say it out loud, but I will, Jonathan. You know, these are not people who are destitute, escaping a tyrannical regime. They're people.
Why do you say that I would say? Why do you say that I would agree with it? I don't agree with that at all.
But I said you would say different. I don't think you would agree with me.
Sorry. I thought you said I'd say the same in private.
No. People coming over on boats. I don't blame a 23-year-old wanting to leg it from Eritrea or Iran or anywhere else for that matter to come and live in the UK. I just think we should be brave enough to acknowledge that here we are in the 21st century. That's what people do. They want to move around.
Well,
Why would they not?
I think we can also acknowledge that people in Eritrea and Iran are facing dictatorial regimes.
Yeah, but that's not a reason for asylum, is it? You know that. I know that. You can live in a regime that's not very. You might not like it very much, but it's not meant to be a shopping list.
I'm sorry, Ian. If you are a young gay man in Eritrea or Iran,
yeah, that's really what's going on, Jonathan, isn't it? Come on, you know that's not what's happening.
Look, this is not what we look. This is a very, very small proportion of what we're actually talking about. And when we have these discussions, we conflate sort of regular and irregular migration. And a lot of the people that we talk about on the irregular, or as you say, illegal side, are not actually people who come on the boats at all. They're people who overstay visas that they
That's also true. That's also
legally.
True.
And so this is just a very, very complex constellation of 100%. Issues, which is very, very easy to put under one big bag of migration. And it doesn't actually help us to solve the problem at all, because they are incredibly different.
It's about credibility, though, isn't it?
Of the same.
But Jonathan, it's about credibility. It's about saying, even if you don't agree with Keir Starmer, or didn't vote for Keir Starmer, or support Yvette Cooper, what you want to think is, here's a policy. They've got a policy in place that makes sense. It's fair. It's decent, it's not abusive, but it's going to be robust. And that's not what we're getting. People point to the Tories and say they had every chance to sort this. They didn't sort it either. So there's only one option.
I don't think that there is a problem with a lot of people wanting to come to your country if there is capacity for that, and those people are needed to fill sort of vital sort of holes in our workforce, etc. That is the case at the moment. The government already has sort of a point system in place. It's made it incredibly harder to bring care workers who we actually desperately need, because they now can't bring their dependents. Okay. And actually, so we've shot ourselves in the foot time and time again. Fundamentally, migration is not the problem, but the way it's handled and managed, obviously that does need to be fine-tuned.
All right, Jonathan, as ever, thank you. Jonathan Liss, political commentator of The Left. In a moment, Chris Farmer from Reform UK. First, Kevin Foster, former immigration minister, former Tory MP for Torbay. Kevin, good afternoon to you. I mean, we can talk forever about whether or how the Tories blew it on this one. Nonetheless, this is where we're at now. Kemi Badenoch says, look, it's a clean sheet. I'm going to take this approach, maybe a sort of nod to Rwanda, possibly getting stricter on issues around what constitutes, the kind of people that we want into our country. Can she turn it around? Can she nick that ground back from Nigel Farage?
Yes, she can. I think where voters want to see is solid plans. Yes, an acknowledgement that there was an issue before the 4th of July last year, and there's no point pretending. Yet the numbers had come down in 2023. Then they went back up again in 2024. We've smashed the gangs coming in. What she's going to have to put out is a clear set of policies. Also, I think probably move much closer to what was actually Robert Jenrick's position last year around potential leaving of the ECHR to resolve this, because I think just tinkering around with Article 8 isn't going to make a fundamental difference, particularly given some of the judicial activism we've seen. around it, and also have a wider, there's not just one magic bullet solution to any of this. And even when you look at what Reform put out recently, which started to move a little bit away from just talking about towing people back and stuff like that to saying about bilateral deals for returns and third country agreements, i.e. Rwanda. So that's what she's going to have to set out. I do actually disagree with John we just had on. Actually, I think both Labour and Conservative could pull people back, because there are people who are generally on the left on a lot of other issues, but who do not like the idea of people breaking into the country. And that's who Keir Starmer will be targeting. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party is looking at how it rebuilds trust and rebuilds confidence that it's not just saying it will do something, it actually will.
There is a sense that, understandably, though, and you will know this, Kevin, how many people who cross over to Reform because of policies like this not being put into action, or because of robust policies not being put into action, because of immigration, as many people see it, getting out of control. So they crossed over to Reform. How many are going to listen to Kemi tomorrow when she gives a speech and go, I made a mistake, I'm going back?
Well, let's be honest, not that many people in the population are going to sit around listening to any politician give a detailed speech on a policy area, regardless of who that is. But what I think people will be looking for is, that when, say, someone like yourself, Ian's then questioning those who are now hold these spokespersons roles for the parties afterwards about, well, what does that mean? You say, for example, you're going to do X, how is then the follow-up question, which always needs to be asked. And too often, let's be honest, in this area, often it's the how that gets lost behind the slogans that are put up. So I think for me, it is going to be about clear on ECHR, clear on what you're going to do around domestic process, and what are you going to do with people who have come from a safe and democratic country, France, who France refuses to allow you to take back, who you can't realistically return to their home country, either through domestic policy reasons or it's a regime that we can't realistically deal with. Which warlord in Afghanistan do you want to talk to about returns, for example? And what do you do with them? That's where third country agreements. And what would you offer to get them? Because it's easy to say you want these deals and agreements. What are you actually prepared to offer up to a country concerned?
And do you think we need to, just a final point, we'll have to be brief, Kevin, do you think we need to, the French identified the UK as being too attractive? If we reduce the pull factor, then we will have fewer people trying to get over. Is there anything in that?
Well, sometimes it's fashionable for French politicians to blame things like, if we had ID cards, then when you went to a job, you'd have to prove your identity. We have to do that anyway. And people employing those on the black market aren't going to, if they're not bothering to check that already, they're not going to check an ID card. So there are some areas where we could make changes around things like larger accommodation centres rather than hotels. But the core of this is actually getting people out of the country when you don't want them to be here. That's the absolute core of solving this problem.
There it is, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin Foster, former immigration minister under the previous Tory government. And former MP for Torbay too. Chris Farmer is a Reform UK member. Speaking from that perspective, Chris, you've heard two voices there. You stand, as I said earlier, your party at an advantage here, because you've got a clean sheet of paper. Nobody can say, look, you messed it up, because you haven't had a go at this one yet. You do speak very, very powerful language on this issue. It's very seductive. It's very appealing. It means business. But is it, some wonder that, speaking big words is all well and good. When you get in the big job, Nigel's got the keys to number 10. Can he really deliver on what people are looking for?
Absolutely, he can deliver, because the problem is not really a technical problem. It's a political problem of will. This problem has been going on literally for decades, because the political establishment really doesn't want to solve this problem, because the political establishment as a whole does not see Britain as a free, independent, sovereign nation. The Conservatives, the Labour Party, certainly didn't want Brexit, which was about establishing Britain as a free, independent, sovereign nation. The current establishment still doesn't. Keir Starmer absolutely does not like the idea of Britain being a free, independent, sovereign nation. As we know, he is trying to get us back under the auspices of the European Union. But a government of a country has two fundamental jobs to do. The first one is to secure our individual freedoms, and the second one is to secure our borders. And they've been failing dismally on both counts. They've been attacking our freedoms over the last couple of years, as everybody knows. And Keir Starmer is still pinning us down on our freedoms. He's reducing them every year. And now they are attacking our borders. Well, when I say attacking them, they're just opening them up. because they do not believe in closed borders. They absolutely believe in open borders, because they do not stand for the British people. They stand for the globalist elites. They do not believe Britain should be or is a free, independent, sovereign nation. Keir Starmer would like to hook us back into the European Union, and then beyond that, the World Health Organization, and beyond that, the World Economic Forum. We know that Keir Starmer prefers the World Economic Forum at Davos because he told us so on TV. When he was asked, does he prefer Davos or Westminster, he said Davos without a moment's hesitation. So we can guarantee with 100% certainty that all of the rhetoric that we've been getting from Keir Starmer, from Rishi Sunak before him, from Boris Johnson before him, from Theresa May before him, and from David Cameron before her, all of them are globalists. Every single damn one of them. They absolutely...
They would say, I mean, look, many people know exactly what you're talking about when you say globalist. Others would say, well, hang on, it's 21st century, it's a fairly small planet. We're going to be clearly signed up to some global arrangements. It'd be a bit weird if we had none of those agreements. That's just the way the world's got to work these days. But yes, Labour would say, and the Tories would say, you can do both. You can, be part of, some of those institutions, but still look after your own borders. And Kemi Badenoch is saying she'll look at any international agreement that stands in the way of an immigration policy. She'll look at surmounting that.
You have to make a distinction between economics and politics. Of course, you have to get into economic unions with people in the sense of economic unions. Remember, the economic union used to be the EEC, used to be the European Economic Community, if you remember that years ago. Well, they changed it, didn't they? It's no longer an economic community. It is a European political union. So you guess this is a confusion that they purposefully put in front of the British people, because they keep saying every argument for the European Union is economic, and every argument for mass migration is economic. But we're not talking about economics. We're talking about the country's borders. It's a political question. And in order to solve a political question, you have to have the political means to do it. Yeah. The political means just are not there because they do not believe in Britain as a free, independent, sovereign nation. That is the key stopper.
So that is almost the pivotal point here. You can't ever have a seriously robust and meaningful immigration policy unless that is at the core of your political ideology.
They have a political ideology which endorses globalism. All of them, all the current parties, the Greens, the Labour Party, Lib Dems and the Conservatives are all essentially the same in the sense that they are globalists. They are signed up to the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the European Union. They all believe in net zero. They all believe in open borders. They are identical things with different colored ties. That's it. That's the only difference. The only difference out there is Reform UK. We are the only party that believes in that Britain should be a free, independent nation state, capable of protecting its own freedoms, capable of protecting its own borders. We have something called a border force, which is meant to enforce the borders. Now it's been turned into a state-run taxi service to take illegal immigrants from France into Britain and put them in houses at public expense.
All right, Chris, I have to stop there because we hit the clock. Very, very powerful stuff from Chris Farmer, Reform UK member. I mean, he's going to say that anyway, isn't he? He represents Reform UK. Who do you trust of the three? I mean, he said a lot there, but he rather makes the point that I was kind of hinting at, and I hint at this in terms of having a fairly intelligent debate about it. There's a lot of promises in what Reform are saying. To be fair, you can't accuse them of anything because they haven't done anything yet. But within those promises, there could be some pitfalls. Could they really deliver? Or is it the Tories? Could even Labour finally solve the problem? That would be amazing. 0344 499 1000.
if they all chose and they were allowed to ditch the burqa, not wear anything, but wear just, you could see all their faces, they wear normal clothes. If that happened, would you personally like that?
If that happened, I would be happy because that means that women are given the opportunity to make their own choice. That's the argument I go back to. Ultimately, the argument that Jess is making is ignoring the voices of the actual women that are being affected. You're assuming their position. You're assuming
I'm not assuming their position
and it's
at all.
completely not evidence-based at all.
I'll tell you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's go to the calls. David in Exeter. What have you got for us, David? Hi.
I just want to challenge your previous guest.
Which one?
Chris, talking about Keir Starmer trying to get us back into the EU. So just a question for Chris. Is he aware of the formal initiation that Starmer has conducted with the EU to take us into his so-called defence pact that I submit is actually taking us into European Defence and Security Union?
Okay.
But he's just not fezzing up to actually articulating it properly so the British public don't get spooked. Now, the story is for reform. They know all about this. And this is something I've worked on with the previous defence spokesperson, Colonel Frederick Cheetham, who very unfortunately had a heart attack the fortnight before the general election. And all of the press statements that were going to be put out on this were all parked because the poor chap had a heart attack. I got a general to volunteer to step up to be Reform's defence and security spokesperson. That was never expedited by Nigel Farage. And now we've got a situation where they've effectively allowed Keir Starmer, unchallenged, unscrutinised in Parliament with their MPs, that are even talking about this at all, with the effects, the potential effects on our sovereignty in defence and security are enormous. So I can't see how how is he framing that Keir Starmer is trying to take us into the EU. He's just took a bigger step back into the EU, and Reform are in, like the Tories and Labour, in apolitical silence.
Let's take it back to immigration then, David. Are you saying similar things festering away here as well, that Reform could deliver, the Tories can't, Labour can't, or could the Tories come up from the far side and suddenly reinvigorate themselves?
Well, there's two aspects to this. So you can't have national security without border security, and we really, and this is where they've got to approach this from a twofold perspective. So national security, defence and security. But of course, they're not challenging the people responsible for that, which is Jonathan Powell and the National Security Council. Why are you not talking about this? Why have you not got a defence and security spokesperson going into this and challenging them? Because it's such a target-rich area. It is, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But why have we got this? You're not going to get the Tories to talk about this because the Tory plan to take us into EU defence union is the same.
Yeah, we're on defence again. Can we stick to immigration on this, though? Just immigration. In terms of what Kemi Badenoch could do, David, what you think Yvette Cooper is getting us out of treaties, moving us from the ECHR? The
strategic problem keeps coming back to the ECHR, that we're not, that the government, so that's the civil service predominantly, the permanent secretaries that hold the power, not the ministers, because the ministers are just puppets. So the stumbling block, as I understand it, and this has been kind of articulated by General David Petraeus at Policy Exchange, is that we think that the EU will use the ECHR as the rules for armed conflict, not the Geneva Convention. And that is why our government is not pulling out of the ECHR, is because they will use that as the regulations for the laws of their armed conflict. And that's why our government isn't pulling out, because we're in defence union.
And possibly Kemi Badenoch isn't committing to it either for the same reason. She's obviously privy to a certain amount of security detail too. David, thank you very much indeed. David in Exeter. So you got three leaders here. We're putting the Lib Dems to one side for a second, unless you are a Lib Dem supporter and can put some meat on the bones and finally tell us where they stand on immigration. Yvette Cooper making big noises about immigration, Keir Starmer echoing that. Kemi Badenoch's going to speak over the next 24 hours. She could pull us out of international treaties. Doesn't name specifically which one. There could be a Rwanda-style deal. They're having a big reset on immigration. And, of course, Reform UK saying, no, we'll sort it. Thank you very much. Who do you trust of those three? 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. We'll have more detail on the way coming up on the other side of the news at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon, welcome back. It is indeed the home of common sense. So battle lines are being drawn over immigration. Prime Minister Keir Starmer plans a legal crackdown on migrants exploiting the right to family life. Meanwhile, on the other side of the House, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch aims to bring back a sort of Rwanda-style scheme. What might that look like? We'll have more comment from you on the way. 0344 499 1000. Also this afternoon, Chancellor Rachel Reeves is set to U-turn officially now on those winter fuel payments, proposing to claw back the costs from millions of better-off pensioners. Oh, nice one, Rach. Yeah, she's just gone for the older ones who were worth a few quid and saying, well, you pay. I messed it up, but you pay for it. Yes, silver-haired what's-its. More on that as well. And Reform UK's chairman has called new MP Sarah Pochin's surprise call for a burqa ban dumb, saying he had no idea she would raise it at PMQs. Well, there's a revelation. More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Andy says Chris Farmer just nailed it. He was the Reform UK spokesman. Everything he said was 100% correct, says Andy. Jeff Brewer says, I'm... Ian, shall I start that sentence again? Ian. Hi, Ian. Australia immigration policy is roughly 180,000 places and 132,000 must be skilled. It can work for Australia. Why not for the UK, says Jeff. And one in from David. Who do I trust with immigration? None of them, as none of them can see the laws, regulations, policies, systems and the civil service that we have. Whichever one starts to sort that lot out, then I'll trust them, says David in the Cotswolds. Yeah, well, might talk about the civil service in our next segment. We've got Charlie Rowley with us, a political commentator. No idea he was on the show. It certainly wasn't my idea, but anyway, somebody booked him. Charlie, good.
Yes, they called me up to ask, did I know anybody?
Did you know anybody?
I didn't, and I couldn't think of anyone.
No, I'll bring them in with me, you said. Oh, they didn't come, sorry, and here he is. Charlie, seriously, always good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Charlie, just on that point about we often hear, in fact, a previous guest said the same thing, a previous caller. Ministers don't have any power, really. Secretaries of State don't. The civil servants do, the permanent secretaries. You've worked for very senior ministers. You worked for Michael Gove. What's the truth of that?
Well, there's a lot in there, and that's why you've seen, for example, the Home Office besotted by problems year after year, can't get a grip on actually knowing who's in the country, who's out, and ministers coming and soon going because they're unable to get policies through, or departments. Because what departments don't like to do is they don't like to admit that there's mistakes that have been made, or they don't like to share the problems with their ministers because that's seen as a failure. When actually what they should be doing is running straight to the minister to say, we found a problem here and you can fix it. But the longer that it festers, you just hope that actually it will either go away or the minister will have to carry the can and you'll be still there with the next minister coming in.
But could Michael Gove, just an example because somebody you work with, could he say to the permanent secretary in his department, I want a word, get this sorted out, you've royally cocked it up, by 5 o'clock I want a result on the table? Or would the permanent secretary say to Michael Gove, right, Michael, this is what you're going to do today, and this is how the day will finish?
No, it's more the former, or it certainly was with Michael anyway. But the questions will be around, OK, Michael, you've set out your priorities.
And he's not a shouty man, of course.
He's not a shouty man, no. So it would have been and maybe that's why he arguably, having gone through so many departments, was able to do more than maybe some most. But I think the conversation would be around, these are my priorities, or why aren't we excelling here in this area, or why aren't we going further and faster or achieving what we want to achieve? And it'll be for the permanent secretary to say, well, hold on, this is probably where we are at, or these are the problems, or whether it's a staffing issue, or whether it's a funding issue, or this is who we need to talk to in other departments, because it's never usually just one department that has sole responsibility for everything, even though you think that it does. So if you want to build more homes, which is very much the department I used to run, you still need money from the Treasury. So how do you get that money out of the Treasury?
You've got to keep the Treasury sweet and...
Exactly. And if it's going to be a social housing involved, and if it's going to be, for a particular community or particular area, does that have the transport links? So talking to the Department for Transport, has it got the, a low demographic?
Does it get... I mean, when it comes to advisors going out for beers and a drink in the evening, something that I happen to know advisors love a bit of that. So there you've had a really hard day. You've been at the, housing department. You're out with the people from the Treasury. Do advisors fall out as well, based on sort of turf wars and things like we were just talking about, rather than just not liking each other, which you might do in the workplace?
It has been known that there's been the odd tough conversation over a tequila or two, but I think
there's a reason he's known as Rabble Rowley.
Yes, not since the incident have I.
Well, it's true. Yes, we don't talk about that, of course.
But it depends on
notice.
It depends on the individual, because I think there are some people that are in it for and able to just understand government and therefore see it as a team game. But there are some people that do become very tribal because they are so passionate and connected to their boss that things can be a bit too one-sided.
Well, on this point, so we've got battle lines being drawn, and this is an extraordinary time, and I'm sure you've not really seen it either. We seem to have parties electioneering 4 years before an election, certainly on immigration. So reform, this is in their DNA. It's part of why reform formed, for goodness sake, along with previously Brexit Party, UKIP, whatever. This is central to who they are. They're very much in favour of sort of an more autonomous approach as a country, with a very, very strict, fair but strict immigration policy. Simple as that. There's they're not denying it. Whereas Tory and Labour have kind of mucked around with this, not quite sure where they are, because, you know, if you take the Tory position, it's not so much a laissez-faire approach, but, you know, as a kind of capitalist sort of society, things just balance out, it'll be fine. David Cameron was, you know, if the truth be known, was quite relaxed about immigration. Boris Johnson was quite relaxed about it. Keir Starmer, Yvette Cooper, they're certainly relaxed about it. So who do you trust on this? Who are you meant to listen to? Because now they're all lining up going, no, me. No, I'm going to be stricter. I'm going to be ECHR, yeah, we'll pull out of that agreement. We'll have a Rwanda-style scheme, you know, the one we didn't have before, but now we're going to have one.
Yeah,
who are voters meant to believe?
You're absolutely right. And what voters, who they want to believe, are people that deliver results.
Yes.
And for far too long, you know, the Tories didn't get immigration down, particularly didn't tackle illegal immigration, legal migration. OK, the Rwanda scheme was there. Very costly, took a long time, and that's going back to that clunky civil service sort of, you know, approach, where a lot of people in the Home Office probably voted Remain all those years ago, who were still the same ones. So there was some tensions there about a tough immigration or deterrent policy. So,
do you think they would have stood in the way? I mean, that's always the accusation. Civil servants stood in the way. They agitated against Brexit. They were essentially activists.
Yes.
But they were meant to be civil servants.
Yes. You can always tell, and this is not, you know, my view alone. You know, any former ministers that have written their own autobiography, they will tell you that when the civil service feels that a government is on its way out, or if a minister is in trouble, all of a sudden things do tend to slow down a bit, particularly if you're trying to ram through a massive policy, because you're naturally, however wrongly, sitting there thinking, well, hold on, I'm the civil servant that's going to have to write all of this bill, or I'm going to have to do all the heavy lifting. But if they're not going to be there tomorrow, then I may as well just slow the pace down.
I'll work from home.
I'll work from home, and I'll see if it's another minister tomorrow.
Don't worry, Nadine, it'll be ready on Wednesday.
Yes.
Although Nadine Dorries always said that she had brilliant civil servants working alongside her.
Yeah, and some are fantastic, and some get it, some are doers, and some really will have your back, and some will, you know, really want to be there to fix the problems of the day. But there is, I think, in too many areas, people that have their own views, and it becomes the civil service machine rather than the political one.
But on that point of immigration, look, the Tories or Labour can't really catch reform up on this, can they? No matter what they do. So Kemi Badenoch could make a massive announcement, and it could sound very seductive, and it could make sense, and she could sort of argue, look, I might have been in the last government, collective responsibility, I wasn't making the decisions, I just, you know, went along with what was kind of agreed. She could make that argument, but no one who was a Tory and then went to reform is then going to go back to the Tories, are they? Go, right, yeah, Kemi's got it sorted now.
No, I think that's right. I think that's the problem for the Tory party. Whoever is the leader, because there's obviously a lot to talk about, you know, whether there's going to be a challenge or whether, you know, Kemi will be there in a few years' time because they see Rob Jenrick maybe as someone that's acting as leader and doing lots of videos and doing a lot better, it seems, on social media at times. But you're right. But the voter will be looking at the Tory party and they'll think that whatever you say, you had your chance. And you blew it. And you know, that's why Labour won a big majority, not because everybody overwhelmingly wanted to then support the Labour Party. They just wanted to give the Tories a kicking. They wanted to get rid of them for their failure. So I think whoever it is, and the Tory party in general, will have a real issue trying to win back those voters based on immigration, based on the economy, to try and bring taxes down, because, as I say, they've had their chance. Labour are in now. They seem to be doing all kinds of things that are messing it up. You know, getting rid of the deterrent for one, allowing record numbers of people to enter the country for two. So now that's why people are looking for the alternative, and that's reform.
Yeah, and that seems to be, there's momentum around them. Your former boss, Michael Gove, seems editorially to be sort of a nice backing for reform in his new world.
Well, I think Michael, if I know him well enough, would probably say that as the editor of The Spectator, it's a centre-right publication that allows freedom of speech amongst the centre-right. So, you know, you've got to acknowledge that the Reform are doing well in the polls, and that's reflected in their editorial.
That sounds exactly what Andrew Neil used to say back in the day as well. Is there a certain set of words?
All great men.
All great men. No, 100% all great men. Number 2, winter fuel allowance. They're obviously going to now reverse this. I mean, I said this yesterday. There are U-turns and U-turns. Sometimes governments are accused of doing a U-turn. It's not actually a U-turn. It's actually just they've adapted, or they've altered a part of a policy, or they've added something to it. This is the dictionary definition of a U-turn, right? There's no grey areas on this one. This is, we're getting rid of it and now we're not. But they've got a couple of reasons behind it, of course. Now the economy has picked up. But really, who told you that, firstly, Mr. Starmer? So that's not true. But the only way they can make this work, apparently, is by just getting other pensioners to pay for it.
Yep. Exactly.
Which is kind of, I don't know, it's a bit like sort of somebody in a prison camp getting other prisoners to, so some prisoners get the perks and other prisoners don't get the perks. You're the bad prisoner.
Yeah, exactly. This is, you're absolutely right, the definition of a U-turn, it is a full 180.
Oh, it's a beauty.
And
a peach of a U-turn.
Exactly. In fact, I think they're at risk of doing a whole 360 at the minute.
It could well, yeah, you never know.
Because they've taken it away. They took it away early. One of the first things that they said they were going to do, take away the winter fuel allowance. They've then come to the conclusion late in the day that they're going to have to do a U-turn, so they're giving it back to everybody.
Yeah.
Only then to say at the next tax year that we're going to then take it away maybe from 5 million pensioners, giving it back to the full 10 million, taking it away maybe from another 5 million who might be in that top wealth bracket. But by the time you've done all of this working out and toing and froing, the administrative cost of taking it away last winter, giving it back this winter, then taking it away from half of those people will be massive. It will outweigh the entire cost of the whole policy in the first place. And it was only supposed to save 1.5 billion, which I know is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of the savings that the Chancellor wanted to make, this is not something that she should have gone for. She did. But it took far too long for them to make the U-turn and understand that they needed to U-turn, because if they had just done it immediately, then people would have had their winter fuel last winter. The right people would have got it this winter.
It wouldn't have happened.
And the administration would have been a lot smoother.
It's all going to be down to where this line is drawn, wasn't it? Because it seemed to be drawn about the 11,500 mark, which is just completely laughable, by the way. I mean, I have some sympathy with the sort of overarching issues with the winter fuel. I think when Labour brought it in, it was about 20 quid or something. I've got a feeling it was, I think Gordon Brown was the Chancellor, I think it was meant to be just for one winter. It was a particularly cold winter that was penciled in, and Brown went, we'll just put this 20 quid in. And then, of course, like, the universal credit uplift that the Tories experienced, once you've put something, to take it away again is almost impossible without being seen as some kind of demon. So that's kind of what's happened. And then, of course, each year it's got more and more. But to put the line at 11,500 quid was ridiculous. It was insulting to people.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, again, I think, when you talked about civil servants before, who made that decision? It would have been some sort of Treasury calculation. So mandarins in the Treasury who aren't pensioners, who probably don't know all of the figures. Same with the farmers. There's a huge discrepancy over how many farms are going to be affected by that inheritance tax. Yeah. And the number was huge between, I think, the Treasury said it was only going to be a handful, but the NFU said it's about 75,000. So there is something that is not right done with the calculations. But I think it's just one of those where, again, still not knowing the detail of where that line's going to be drawn is a problem for people. And I just think it is it's been a hopeless policy with, as I say, screeching U-turn and inflicted political damage no end.
Final one here. Reform UK Chairman Zia Youssef has criticised Sarah Pochin. She's the new Runcorn MP, big electoral success a couple of weeks ago in the by-election. It was her first question at PMQs. She had the opportunity, and she asked as a question, would the Prime Minister consider banning the burqa? And there was a kind of a bit of a sort of odd gasp in the House. Not that anyone should talk about banning the burqa. I think most people thought, what a random question, what a weird thing. Your first time in Westminster and you play the old burqa question thing. I mean, there's loads of things you could have done for the people of Runcorn and bring it up at some point. And in fact, there's nothing wrong with the view she had. But it's not also reform policy, so I don't know how this happened. I do understand that this was not just her in cahoots in coming up with this question. They thought, it's the first female Reform UK MP. She's going to really stir it up here. And most people thought, what a waste of time. And Zia Youssef has called it dumb because it's not party policy.
Yes, I think this is where there is still a problem within Reform. I mean, they still advertise themselves as a start-up, and they've obviously done incredibly well in terms of polling and in terms of the local elections. But this is where I think there are still gaps in a well-oiled political party machine. You're right, it was an odd question, not because of the question, but just it's not been in any discussion, it's not been in the column inches of the newspapers, it's not a conversation that the country has been talking about. They've been talking about winter fuel, they've been talking about the two-child benefit cap, they've been talking about the record numbers of people that have entered the country illegally over the last few weeks. So there's nothing wrong in the question, but it was just an odd one to ask at that particular time, as you say. And the idea that then, and look, you know, if you just put it down to one backbench MP asking the Prime Minister a question, you get lots of odd questions at PMQs from different various...
True.
You will get Labour MPs asking their own Labour Prime Minister some odd questions that might not have been whipped or might not have been understood. So you get that. However, Reform have only got 5 MPs. So you would have thought between them that there would have been a discussion or some understanding about what the question was going to be, and somebody would have maybe just pointed out, okay, is that actually our policy? Do we support it before we ask that question?
Yeah, I'd have thought so.
Never ask a question. I was always told, never ask a question unless you know the answer. You've got to know the answer first to catch your opposition on
well, it did, and Starmer just... firstly, he just ignored it and said, well, I'm just not going to get into that, and then just used it as a moment to slag off Reform. So it kind of... And there's nothing wrong with asking a random question. It is PMQs. It's not meant to be, you know, always all the massive issues of the day. It's meant to have those little sort of quirks and curveballs in it. But it just felt a bit odd.
It did, and it's been compounded by, as you say, that tweet by the chairman to say that, you know, it was... I mean, because, I mean, the tweet itself was sort of saying, sorry, I didn't see the question, or I haven't seen it because I've been busy doing Doge, and that's all great work. It seems to be saving taxpayers' money in the local councils, but still finding the time to reply on Twitter or X to Katie Hopkins, who asked that question. You know, maybe keep your time spent on Doge rather than engaging in that kind of question, you know, that kind of Q&A, I would have thought.
We're out of time, Charlie.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Somebody very, very unkindly says, get this man off air.
Oh.
Mr. Gove could be so unkind.
Don't talk about Ian like that, please. Ian is fantastic.
Please. I jest. Charlie, it's great to see you.
Thank you very much.
We will continue. More comments coming in from you on all the issues we've discussed. Plus, who do you trust on immigration? Lines are open. This is Talk.
Why is there this unique obsession with victims in Gaza?
Britain is the direct contributor to the war effort that Israel is...
1% of weapons used by Israel.
Britain isn't contributing to what's happening in Sudan.
We don't care about those babies dying.
It's not that we don't care.
It is. We don't care about it. It's not on the... Are we discussing it now?
The main demand of the demonstrators and the protesters is that Britain stops its complicity in the genocide.
If it was a genocide...
Again, this is... You're still that Japanese fighter fighting... That
no, I just know what words mean.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 23 minutes after 2 o'clock. David says, who do I trust with immigration? None of them, as none of them can with the laws, regulations, policies, systems and the civil service we have. Whichever one starts to sort that lot out, then I'll trust that one, says David in the Cotswolds. Yeah, and there is. This is why there is a little bit of, it's not even suspicion, it's just a question mark over could realistically, if Reform UK were in Parliament tomorrow, in government tomorrow, could they actually do all the things they want to do? I'm not expecting it within the first week, but you might expect some real movement within the first year. And there is a question mark over whether they would even be able to do that, which I think is the point that David is making there. Mark's in Lincolnshire. What are you thinking, Mark? Afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian, mate. I mean, my opinion on this is, I said it before, mate, to you. I don't think Reform are going to be able to do what they promise. I don't think they even want to do what they promise. I think they're chopping and changing so much, it's ridiculous. I mean, at this point, again, as I've said, you know, I'm very much a UKIP member. That's who I'll be voting for anyway. But as far as Reform voters are concerned, I'd sooner they were voting for Conservative than Reform. To be quite frank with you, because, well, the problem is, Ian, and I keep saying this to people all the time, you've got no say with Reform. You know, they keep chopping and changing things. I mean, what's Sarah Pochen going to do now? Is she going to toe the party line? Is she going to become a bit more like a Rupert Lowe figure and say the things that the people actually want Reform to be doing? You know, in which case she'll find herself quickly out. There'll be some scandal around her, like, you know, allegedly, or as I firmly believe, did happen with Rupert. You know, all these kind of issues. I mean, the whole thing about, for example, on the Sarah Pochen thing, you know, the burqa thing, I can remember Richard Tice on this very station with the exact same opinion as that. He was wanting to ban the burqa. I can remember hearing him say it when he used to have his show on here. You know, and
but then there's different.
Farage has said the same.
Yeah, and that's true. But as a party, they've come up with what seems to be a policy, and it was it not a bit odd that she asked a question that isn't? Firstly, she didn't know what Keir Starmer's answer was going to be, and that was just a basic error. But secondly, should she have been more aware? If it's not her party's policy, why would she ask it?
Maybe it's something she's passionate about. Maybe it's something her constituents have mentioned to her. Who knows, really, at the end of the day. As for, you know, Keir Starmer didn't know what the question or the answer or whatever it was. You know, so what at the end of the day? At least that's natural. You know, at least she's a little bit more human in that sense. You know, I think the overriding thing that I get, that I think a lot of people feel, Reform voters, whoever you are, you know, we're tired of what we keep seeing in Westminster. You know, everybody talks about, I keep hearing the same thing as well from commentators. You know, that's just not how things are done. Westminster works a certain way. Well, this is the thing, Ian. We're sick of that. We want Westminster to work a different way. We are fed up to the back teeth of the constant lies, the constant games, the constant, oh, who's doing this, who's doing that? Well, you say this, you say that. You know,
how do we solve this though, Mark? I mean, what is it we need to change? And are we kind of hoping for something? Are we not really just asking we want things to be better, rather than we've got to change the whole system?
Yeah, obviously people want things to be better. We all do. Whatever side of the political fence you're on, you want it to be how you see it. I mean, for me personally, it's very much the case, you know, I'll give you the classic, you know, as I say, I'm a UKIP guy. I want people to think out of the box. This is the thing, you know, if we keep doing the same things, we're going to get the same results. And that's why I have such an issue with Reform, because they're doing the same kind of stuff that the Tories were doing, you know, and, you know, they're having all this trouble, really, at the end of the day with 5 MPs. what the hell are they going to be like if they've got 300? You know, that in itself concerns me. You know, it also concerns me that, as I've said before, you know, with reform, you can vote them in. All these people can vote them in, and that's fantastic. You know, I'm a realist. They probably will take it the next time, I think. If it keeps going the way it is at the minute, they certainly will. But the issue then becomes, well, what can you do about it if they suddenly change into something that you don't want them to be? The answer to that is nothing.
And there is the danger. And, you know, we kind of do see this a lot. And I don't think there's some sort of organised agenda in the civil service where they go, right, this is how we do business. Whoever comes in, they will do it this way. It doesn't quite work like that. But I think what tends to happen is that you get into power and a couple of the head honchos in the civil service and big advisors go, look, you can do this, you can do the most common sense approach, the way we found over the years is to do business is to do it this way. Might not be the right way, might not be your own desired way, but it's by far the easiest way and the less faff and least expensive. I wonder if it's more like that, Mark.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the civil service is a major issue anyway, because that, just as far as I'm concerned, needs gutting, root and stem. You know, I'd much sooner be voting a party that's willing to take on tasks like that. I mean, you know, you talk about deportations and things like this.
Yeah.
You know, these are big challenges that any party would face if you're actually going to be serious about it.
Sure.
And the only way that you're going to overcome those things is by instituting policies and laws into the country to enable you to do that. But also part of that is, as I say, you know, gutting the civil service, because unless you do that, you're only ever going to hit roadblocks. You're only ever going to keep doing what the Tories were doing. You know, the few people that we had in the Conservative Party back in the day, before everybody jumped ship, including myself, you know, that were actually pushing for things like this, you know, whether it's Rwanda or whether it's, you know, deporting illegal criminals and all the rest of it. What happens? The same thing. It's the same thing over and over again. The civil service will block it. The human rights lawyers will block it. And the one thing the Tories never did, if they ever want a chance ever again of getting in power, is to actually address those issues, you know, and to actually mean it. At the moment, they're never going to get back into power. You know, because nobody, obviously, well, the 14 years with nothing but lies, you know, promised one thing and delivered the complete opposite. You know, Labour voters are seeing this now with their party. And, you know, I can't remember who it was it Jonathan you had on earlier, who was saying the same thing. And as he was saying it, I was thinking, yeah, exactly what the Tories did. You know, the Tories were trying to appeal to lefties, and they completely left their base, you know, completely behind. And that's what Labour are doing. They're trying to chase reform policies. And as Jonathan rightly says, people that are looking to vote reform are never going to vote Labour in a million years. That's the reality. You know, but as I say, for me personally, I want people thinking out the box. I want parties thinking out the box that are willing to take on the massive challenges that we face. Because, you know, to deport all the illegals, Ian, you're talking about a good 10-year project there.
But nobody's going to go, right, because the best that's going to happen is that even if reform came in tomorrow, they're going to say, right, OK, from this time next year, we will have very strict policy on anyone coming across the channel. And everyone will be going, well, what about there's 88,000 people in hotels? What about no, we're going to have to ignore that bit. That's the kind of thing that's likely to happen, Mark, rather than somebody going, right, anyone who's in a hotel now, I hate to break it to you, but the chances are you're not going to be remaining here. And we're going to change your status from hotel to some other form of accommodation, which, not to punish you, but just to make sure that you're aware this will be your last stop before you return to your original destination. Reform aren't going to say that, are they?
No, they're not.
But that's what people want Reform to say.
Exactly. This is, you know, I come back to this again. These are things that they used to say. They used to talk about these things. Now, a lot of people, if you go on things like X and whatever, a lot of people pin it all on, you know, the arrival of Zia Yusuf. And that might have something to do with it, I don't know.
Maybe.
It's feasible. But the way I see it, you know, where the illegals are concerned, it should be immediately into a detention centre. That in itself would stop people turning up. Even if it's the case that, yeah, it may take you 5 years to deport. But if they know they're going to spend that 5 years in a detention centre, they're not allowed to wander free and they're going to get basic amenities, you know, then they're not going to come, are they, at the end of the day? So that in itself would solve that issue. Yeah. And then the larger issue of the illegals that are already in the country, whether, you know, visa overstayers, that kind of thing.
Sure.
You know, that's a slightly bigger project that's going to take a longer time to actually solve. But it needs solving, whether that's addressing the civil service issue,
sure,
whether it's addressing the court issue, the law issue. It needs doing. I'd much sooner a party came in, got absolutely slated, but we're doing what the people want them to do.
Yeah, got it. Listen, it's that, isn't it? It's that point. And then, of course, there's the next question that follows. Which people want them to do it? Because others will go, well, we didn't vote for... Do you know what I mean? So we get into that territory. Mark, thank you. Slightly overshot on time. Back with more from you shortly. Anything you've just heard there and throughout the course of the programme, 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This comes from Peter in Norfolk, who says, from what I understand, Sarah Pochin asked her constituents what question they wanted her to raise in Parliament at her first Prime Minister's questions. I stand to be corrected, but that's my understanding. Yes, that is... Apparently, she essentially just said on social media, what questions would you like me to ask? And she picked one. It wasn't that it was the most popular, it's just one. And there's nothing wrong with asking a question. There's nothing wrong with asking a question about a burqa. But there is that sense that you're making a historic moment in your own life and your own family. Is that the best one out of all of them? She could have asked it in 2 weeks' time and it would have had would have resonated differently. There could have been something more powerful, a bit more of a moment to catch. Wouldn't it be great if she caught Keir Starmer really in the headlights with a good old juicy curveball on her first outing? And it just fell a bit flat, and then she was ignored. And now the party chairman says the question is dumb, basically. So that's not, I don't think, panned out as they initially thought. Let's talk about this. Ed Miliband has apparently defeated an attempt by Rachel Reeves to raid one of his key net zero programmes in next week's spending review. After tough talks, they agreed to keep the £13.2 billion warm home schemes, which funds insulation and energy-efficient upgrades, largely intact. The deal signals a weakening of Reeves's influence as Downing Street looks to ease backbench anger over spending cuts. Let's speak to Ross Clark, columnist over there at The Sun. Afternoon to you, Ross. I was quite surprised. I was disappointed in this, and I was quite surprised because there was I'd been gradually getting a sense that Ed Miliband was not the head boy he thought he was, and everything from continual exploration of oil fields to expansions of airports were big old kicks in the whatsits to the net zero secretary. So I was surprised that if this has been a reversal, that it's happened at all.
Yes, it did appear that Ed Miliband's star seemed to be falling a bit in the cabinet, but then it emerges that he's one of the most popular cabinet ministers among Labour Party members.
Man alive, what the hell? Who are these people? What's going on, Ross?
You may well ask, but that is apparently the reality of politics within the Labour Party at the moment. So, Rachel Reeves is desperate to find some spending cuts. Her £40 billion of tax rises in the last budget already been gobbled up by all these fat public sector pay rises. She's lost her fiscal headroom, as she likes to call it once. She's just about lost her fiscal headroom again. So, we got to the point where taxes are so high, they're not yielding as much as, theoretically they ought to be, because they're discouraging economic activity. For example, the rise in employees' national insurance contributions, it has discouraged businesses from creating jobs, and therefore it's the overall revenue that's come in from that wheeze is not as high as it should be. So the reality is that she's got to cut spending. She can't just keep on raising taxes to fund ever increasing spending. You've got to get spending under control, and cutting back the warm home scheme, which Labour, by the way, doubled from what it was under the Tories. That was one of the methods by which she had hoped to cut a bit of spending, but it seems that she's been defeated in that. And
it's a sort of an extraordinary time because, as you say, for whatever reason, Labour voters seem to like Ed Miliband. I think the wider country sort of see him as a bit of a sort of joke, a bit of a caricature of a politician. I mean, he is of the Corbyn ilk, right? I mean, that's where his allegiances, in political terms, would lie. This is a pet project of his. He's absolutely wedded to it. It's like trying to get somebody out of the rehabilitation clinic or get them into the rehab. The man will not listen, and it appears he's now got the ear of the Prime Minister on this, because I'd imagine a conversation about spending this much money or not spending it, Ross, would it to some degree cross the path of the PM, not just the Chancellor?
Well, yes, it seems that it's the influence of Keir Starmer that has forced Reeves to backtrack. It's worth looking a bit more detail at the Warm Homes Plan, because it's often described as a means of improving energy insulation for homes for poor people. But quite a bit of the money goes to something called the Boiler Upgrade Scheme, which is where people replace their oil or gas boiler with a heat pump and claim a grant of up to £7,500. Now, you've just got to look at the geographical distribution of where those grants have been taken to see that a lot of that money is going to wealthy households in the southeast of Britain, and it's not really helping poor people help their homes at all. It's helping buy sort of green bling for environmentally conscious middle class homeowners, and they're the only ones who can afford to replace their boiler, because you get your £7,500 grant, but it might cost you another £10,000 to put in your heat pump because they're so expensive. So it's cutting back this money would not have been taking away money from the poor. It's taking money away from the middle classes.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And again, resting everything at the altar of net zero. I mean, lagging my loft, am I going to save the planet, Ross, doing this? I mean, I think I speak for every human alive. We all want a cleaner planet. We all want to live in efficient homes. We'd all like cheaper electricity. There's not a person, it'd be a bit weird to meet somebody who didn't think all of those things. But to be so locked into this, like it is a religion, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I'd say lagging your loft would save you a lot of money. I don't know the planet, but there are some energy efficiency improvements which really make sense, and putting in loft insulation is one of them. It doesn't cost a lot, and it can save a bit of money. The payback time on that particular project is worthwhile. But there's an awful lot of other things to do with net zero, where of course, it costs a fortune and it doesn't save you money either. And heat pumps, electric cars, and they're all sort of falling into that category. And then of course there's in the wider economy, we've got net zero measures which are destroying jobs. There was an interesting report from Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen this week, which pointed out that jobs are being lost in oil and gas industry at twice the rate they're being created in the offshore wind energy business. Wow. And of course this is one of the great Miliband's great selling points, or so he hopes, is that we're all going to be made richer through all these well-paid green jobs and so on. And when you look at the analysis, well, some people might have got jobs in the renewable energy industry, but net zero is destroying jobs in fossil fuels at a far greater rate.
Indeed. Just a final word, Ross. I know you've written about winter fuel allowance. This is something that, of course, has hung around the neck of the Labour Party since they came into government. They abolished it. It became a narrative that was never going to go away. So they've reversed it now. Have they limited the damage? Is all tickety-boo over there at Labour HQ now, do you sense?
Well, what they've done is, what apparently will be announced is that they're going to give the winter fuel allowance to everybody again, as it was. However, when you fill in your tax return, if you earn over a certain amount, as retired, and a lot of retired people do still work, they have incomes from various sources other than their pensions, of course, the money will be clawed back, rather in the way that child benefit is clawed back at the moment. But that creates a bit of a it creates one of these unpleasant cliff edges where your income goes up a little bit and you find yourself actually worse off because you're having a benefit taken away from you. And the tax system and benefit system is just full of those cliff edges, and the last thing it needs is another one. And I look at the how much money the winter fuel payment is going to save us, save the government £200 to £300 a year. That money, by the way, is totally dwarfed by how much the triple lock is costing the government.
Sure.
If you look since the triple lock was established in 2011, 2012, the state pension is now £800 a year bigger than it would have been had pensions gone up with average earnings, as with one of the. And so, that is what really needs addressing when it looks to, you look at improving the government's fiscal position in years to come. It's the triple lock, which is the bomb that has been planted beneath the public finances. That is what needs to go. And I find, that the fuss over the winter fuel allowance, which will save a far smaller amount of money, is I think is ignoring the bigger issue, which will need to be addressed, if not by this government, then by a future one.
Yeah, well, they tend to always kick that one down the road, don't they? Because there's a sort of a big reality facing them where the biggest expenses going forward are likely to be. Ross, thank you, sir, for your time, as ever. He's Ross Clark, columnist over there at The Sun. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000. I know we've asked this question before, but the heat pump thing, I couldn't have a heat pump in my house. It wouldn't work because the logistics of the house. It's the wrong house. You couldn't get the pipes in. And as I understand it, you've got to change the size of the pipes, the size of the radiators. You've got to have somewhere to put the heat pump itself is quite a reasonably large bit of kit. So if you've got one of those little outhouses attached to you, you might think, well, that's great. That's where I put the stuff, bits of gardening things and old boxes and bits from the kitchen we don't use anymore. That thing might be full of heat pump, quite big. But the one thing I constantly hear is that it doesn't work that well. I keep hearing people referring to it as a kind of reverse microwave. or something of that nature. A reverse mic. So that would be something that made things cold, wouldn't it? It's just basically a fridge. We can turn your house into, oh, it's very, very cold in here. Don't worry, let's refrigerate the place. I don't think that would work. Nonetheless, I think in principle, in terms of how it works, or something of that nature, because I know it takes the air from the outside and then it does something with it and then changes that into heat. The biggest criticism I hear about the heat pump is that it takes a long time. So first, it's quite expensive. To get the heat pump, you might have to change your plumbing and your rads. But even when you've got it in place, it can cost a few quid to run it. Well, it can take a lot of time to run it, I should have said, sorry, because to get it to 23 degrees is not the work of a moment. Is that true? If you have one, I'd love to speak with you. You've got one and you're absolutely 100. Go, wow, the best thing I've ever bought in my life. Forget my new car, forget the dog, forget that trip we did to Ibiza when we were old enough to still do all the stuff you're not meant to do when you're married. Forget all of that. The best thing I've ever bought in my life. Biggest single purchase. What are they interview a celebrity? What's the best thing you ever bought? And they'll give you an answer to, oh, it's my Louis Vuitton bag when I first got my big paycheck. Blah, blah, blah. Would anybody say, yeah, it's my heat pump. My heat pump was the best thing ever. Oh, man alive. How noticeable is it that I've got much cheaper electric, much more efficient, the house is never feeling as warm as it currently feels, and it doesn't cost me as much. Is that the story of the heat pump? I'm all ears at this end, and I think there's loads of people listening to this, bearing in mind Ed Miliband is looking for 13.2 billion quid for the warm home scheme. I think it's reasonable to ask, does this stuff actually work? 0344 499 1000. Tell me about the heat pump, good or bad. I would have thought if you've got cavity wall insulation and your loft is lagged and you haven't got big gaps in your windows, that's about it really, isn't it? I think. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
We've discovered a £30 million bridge to nowhere in Lincolnshire County Council, run by the Tories, believe it or not. Right. So much for their competence, and the waste everywhere is shocking. The question is how much of it we can cut out quite quickly. So I'm very happy to stand on our track record as successful business people. I don't think Mr. Stride has run a multi-billion-pound multinational business listed on the stock market where the share price tripled in 4 years under, guess what? Under my stewardship.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Royson says, why was Mark given so much airtime? It just seemed like an opportunity to reform bash. I think he was a reform voter, by the way. And that's the problem with discourse. Reform should be pulled apart till it can hardly walk like any other party should. That's democracy. We don't do hero worship around here. They might be appealing more so, but the more they appeal, the more we need to scrutinise. And in fact, it wasn't really applicable just to reform. It was about the realities of what you can do as a party when you've got all manner of other factors like the civil service and the like, obvious financial constraints. It was a good, I like to think, and Mark was a very intelligent caller, it was a good, intelligent debate about the realities of what a party like Reform can do. But if we write that stuff up as, if you criticise, it's a bit like when you criticise Trump and goes, oh, a bit of Trump bashing, is it? You're saying, yes, we should be bashing the most powerful man in the world on a minute-by-minute basis, or at least scrutinising. What's wrong with that? But yeah, so that's kind of how it should be, I'd like to think, Royce, and I hope that answers the question. And Glenn in Leeds says, Sarah Pochin said she asked her constituents on social media, which is what we mentioned earlier, what should be the first question she should ask at PMQs. The only problem with running polls is that they can be hijacked. I'm not saying it happened here, but it can. It's a good point. I don't think she did it as a poll. I don't think she did. I think she just asked, what should I ask? And a load of answers came through, and for some reason she picked that one. I think others in the party were quite happy about that. It was just a bit of a waste of, you know, bring it up, maybe just not yesterday. Just not the best question, and it was widely derided as being, well, the party chairman himself said it was dumb. Or worse to that effect. Martin is in... before we go to the calls, Voice of Doom, Day 3. It's the political mystery voice. One task you have here, and that's to tell us if you can identify who the person is. So this is Day 3. Have a listen.
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? Normally you're looking for an MP, past or present. If not, it's somebody obviously connected to the world of politics. Have another listen.
Just utterly shocking.
Don't phone in, but you can message 87222 if you fancy having a go. If we get a right answer, we'll tell you what that is on the other side of the news at 3 o'clock. If we don't, it rolls over. One more time.
Just utterly shocking.
87222. You know what to do. Back with your calls. Martin in Exeter. What have you got for us, Martin? Hi.
Hi, I'm going to give you a 60-second heat pump lesson. We've spoken before.
Yes.
Okay, there are two sorts, air-sourced and ground-sourced. So air-source is where it takes the heat from the air and converts it into heat for your heating system. Ground source is where you lay the pipes underground, maybe the borehole or underneath. For every 1 kilowatt in, you get 5 kilowatts out on a ground source. But they're much more expensive to install. Nobody has that. In the UK, we have air source mostly, unless it's a new build. For every 1 kilowatt in, you get 3 kilowatts out.
How does it make the heat? Sorry, this is a dumb question.
Well, it kind of works like an air conditioning unit in reverse.
Okay.
So it takes the heat out of the air. Now, remember that? 1 in, 3 out.
Yep.
So far, so good. Unless the air temperature drops. And then it starts to go 1 to 2, 1 to 1, and then it goes to minus. And now it's costing you money.
Yeah, so it's literally dependent on the weather.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But if you've got a brand new house, my son lives in Sweden, they have a ground-sourced heat pump, works brilliantly. But in our houses, they don't work. I installed one for a lady in a house in Barnet. Her bill in the first month was £1,000.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
1,000? I ain't paying that.
Well, and she's actually going to court with them. They're noisy. They're a pain in the backside. You have to have your radiators bigger. They're just a nightmare, and they do not work unless unless it's a brand
This is a
new.
ground one. The ground one. Listen, we're going to try. It's fabulous to get your thoughts on this, Martin. Brilliant way of articulating it as well. I'm bound to ask if somebody can counter that experience, because he's not going a bundle on it. We're already is at this end, 0344 499 1000. Richard in Blackburn back on with us next as well. And the voice of doom?
Just utterly shocking.
Who's that then? We'll tell you after 3.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We return to the boudoir of common sense. Of course, lots to get through in this section. Battle lines being drawn already over immigration, it seems. We're 4 years away from an election. The Prime Minister Keir Starmer plans a legal crackdown on migrants exploiting the right to family life. I just don't think that's the only thing that's the problem here, Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch aims to bring back a Rwanda-style scheme and circumnavigate international laws that stand in the way. What is happening? Who do you trust on that big issue of immigration? Also this afternoon, mental health sick days have surged by 5 million in just a year, with a record 20.5 million lost to stress, anxiety and depression in 2024. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We've got some great guests coming on to talk this over. And US President Donald Trump says he wants to prevent a migrant crisis like Europe's and has signed an order banning entry from 12 countries, including Iran, Yemen and Somalia. Depending on where you sit politically will depend on how much support you may or may not have given to this man. We'll have details on that as we cross to Michael Graham later in the programme. Before we go any further, let's do the Voice of Doom. This was day 3 of the Mystery Voice. It's always an absolute belter. Have we got a winner? This is the voice.
Just utterly shocking.
Who is that? Wow. Marc Francois It is not. These are some of the guesses. Simon Danchuk, no. Steve Baker, no. Stephen Kinnock, Brandon Lewis, Robert Kendrick, no. Greg Clark, it is not. Andrew Rosendale, it is not. Sir Alex Shelbrook, it is not. We don't have a winner. It's rolling over, kids. Day 4, it's back tomorrow, 2:45, when we'll explore the voice of doom. Now, let's move to this story. Mental health sick days in Britain have jumped by 5 million in the past year. Workers took a record 20.5 million days off in 2024 due to conditions like stress, anxiety and depression. That's nearly 14% of all sick leave, the highest share in 5 days. Lots to talk about. Joining me now, Alistair Sandhouse, consultant neuropsychiatrist and author of No More Normal Mental Health in an Age of Overdiagnosis. Alistair, that's the longest title of a book ever, isn't it? Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon to you as well.
It's I understand it's a very, very thorough and a brilliantly informative read, by the way. So just give us your take. We're going to bring in some other guests shortly. Give us your take on what is happening here. We do know, we are well aware that there is an issue. You know, mental health was hardly talked about for the best part of, you know, human existence up until fairly recently. So there's clearly that's a massive factor. Is something else going on?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors going on, and I think you've identified one of them, which is possibly to some extent just recorrecting something that happened before, that we were probably not diagnosing people that should have been diagnosed for stigma and all the other reasons. But there's a lot more going on than that, I think. I think, number one, well, in no particular order, but diagnostic guidelines, I think, the way they're written now, don't always differentiate normal from pathological mental states. There's a sort of a grey area that I think people find themselves in. And I think sort of related to that is the conceptualization of suffering and distress as mental illness, which is a much more new kind of concept. You know, before, I think people have suffered, and I'm not denying people are actually suffering, but the framing of suffering as a mental health problem is what's new. And I don't think it's always healthy for individuals because I think it sort of locates the blame blame for want of a better word, as something that someone else needs to do to them, that they no longer can control. And I do worry about where that's leading.
And of course, I suppose the problem here, I would imagine from a clinical perspective, is, you know, what you don't want to do is let somebody go or underdiagnose, in the sense that you might well say to a patient, you're just having a few off days, don't worry about it, off you trot. And then you discover some horrifying news 2 days later. Nobody wants to see that. So maybe clinicians, for want of a better phrase, I'm just wondering here, Alistair, do they play it safe a little bit?
Well, I think to some extent, I think a lot of the emphasis that we hear is about awareness raising campaigns. It's about missing things that we could otherwise perhaps be picking up. And I think clinicians do understand that, and I think that perhaps increases the rate of diagnosis. And I think the more public hear about diagnosis, there's a sort of a looping effect where they begin to wonder, does it apply to them?
Yes.
So once you're hearing more about it, and I think that slightly does seem to change the diagnostic criteria, it sort of feeds back so that they do seem to get a little bit looser and diagnoses can be made on slightly less secure grounds. So there's a whole sort of series of things that seem to be happening at once. And although I'm not someone who particularly talks about big pharma or anything, one would also note that it does align with their interest too. The more depression or ADHD, the more. So there's a lot of factors that are lining up in the same direction at the moment and taking us this particular way. And again, I would stress, people are suffering. I don't doubt that. The question is how we understand that and what do we do about it?
Do we need to perhaps, and I don't know which way we would do this, I'm not suggesting you do it at school or in nursery or anything, but is there should there maybe be a bit more emphasis on explaining, part of the human condition is, our predispositions change from time to time, mentally speaking, and, sometimes you have a bad day. You have a bad day, you could have a bad week. Life is full of ups and downs. I know these are all cliches. You'll get turbulence. There'll be moments when your tummy feels a little bit, it feels very physical as well as mental. All of this stuff is perfectly normal. Do we need to sort of teach that a little more?
I think that's a really good question. Is how do we find that balance? And I think there is something in what you're saying that often people do interpret those difficult moments. There was a survey in, I think it was 2015, from the National Union of Students that said something like, I think it was 78% of the respondents had suffered with mental health difficulties over the past year. So it's a really big number, and I think we go back to perhaps those days of remembering what it was like, the pressures of exams and social pressures and all of that, and it's difficult. And the question, some people will have mental illness, but many of them won't do. Yeah. But again, it's what you just said. It's how you frame it and what our expectations are of what life is.
Indeed. Alistair, listen, thank you for your time. We could speak for longer on this, and we will speak again, I'm sure. Really appreciate it. Dr. Alistair Sandhouse, consultant neuropsychiatrist and author. Thank you to him. We'll get an economic perspective on this shortly. First, let's speak to the MP for Ashford, Sojan Joseph, who is a former mental health nurse. Sojan, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. Listen, I mean, you know this from a couple of perspectives now, because you're a politician, but previously this is a role you'd had. Well, you heard from the previous guest there. Are we overdiagnosing problems here?
I don't think we are overdiagnosing. As your earlier conversation, people could have a bad day, just like physical health. Mental health can also affect people for a short term. But what is happening is, rather than finishing that short-term difficulties with the short-term treatment, we often write off people for permanently. That's where the problem. So I can have a bad day today, but I should be completely different tomorrow. So it's not overdiagnosing. How long you keep that diagnosis for is important thing we need to think about.
Yeah. How serious, I mean, there's an economic factor to this, of course. How serious do governments take this? Because there is a sense that people don't want to be unkind to someone who's having an absolute breakdown, but at the same time, we don't want people having time off work just because they're having a bad day.
During my days of practice, I used to care for patients with serious mental illnesses like bipolar. They may get admitted to hospital for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And when they finish the treatment, they used to go back to work. They used to straight go back to work. But that's changed now. Is the culture now is somebody get admitted to hospital or see a doctor with a mental health problem, they tend to stay off work permanently or for long term. And this is the culture we need to change. I think our medical professionals, doctors, and other mental health professionals need to educate the patients. Say, yes, you had a mental health crisis. You are free to go now, or you may need to continue to take some medication, but you are able to go back to work. And being at work is also has a therapeutic effect. You have that social contact with your colleagues. That helps your mental health as well.
Well, you're about to serve on the Mental Health Committee, so maybe there's going to be some movement in this. It's powerful voices like yours, I suppose, that are a bit more measured than some, Sojan, that is needed, right?
I was so pleased to be picked to sit on the Mental Health Bill Committee. Absolutely, I will use my experience. I worked in the NHS for 22 years in the acute mental health sector. So I will be using my experience to make amendments that will help. Hopefully.
Well, we will watch with interest. Thank you, Sojan Joseph, Labour MP for Ashford. Let's speak with Michael Simmons, economics editor at The Spectator. Right, let's knuckle down to it now, Michael. Good afternoon to you. We've got incredible sick leave going on here. 5 million, I mean, health days lost 5 million in the past year. what the heck is going on? Have we just become, you know, I don't know, I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, you know, are we just all gone mad? Are we genuinely, you know, experiencing a cost of living crisis, or have we just reinterpreted the words mental health?
Well, I think there's two main sort of drivers behind this, and your previous guest was touching on this. The first is that we've medicalized having a bad day and being a bit stressed. You know, 10 years ago, you'd be stressed. You might even have a few down weeks, and no one would think that that was even a medical problem. So that sort of, you know, category error one is we now see everything as it's a medical problem. A doctor needs to do something about it. The reason I think that's then affecting not just sick days, but the amount of people that are completely out of work because of long-term sickness is because of a change in the culture that seems to me have happened to lockdown, where if you take the example of like a common cold, you know, when I was growing up, if you had a common cold, as long as you didn't have, you know, a fever or whatever, you were, you know, your mum and dad packed you off to school. And it's always been the same with work, you know, as long as you were not, you know, dreadfully ill, you would sort of make yourself go to work and get on with it. And I think as society, for probably good reasons, during the coronavirus, we changed that and said, no, actually, if you're having a sick day or you're having a mental health day or whatever, you're not going to go to school and you're not going to go to work. And maybe if that's, you know, happens to a few people once or twice, that's fine. But the numbers today show this is happening, you know, millions of times. And what really worries me is not the sick days, but it's when the sick days become sick weeks and become sick months. Yeah. And then you're out of work completely, especially with these mental health ones. Often we know once people go off work for mental health, the chances of them going back are often very slim.
And the problem, as I see it, certainly, Michael, in terms of the issues around this, one of many problems, and I mentioned it to the clinician at the beginning, the neuropsychiatrist we spoke to, you know, doctors are a bit scared. If somebody goes to the doctors and says, look, I've got a mental health condition, doctors aren't going to say, no, you haven't, you're just having a bad day, because that might put them in a compromising position. So they're likely to sort of listen to the patient and acknowledge them. And I understand that, because you could be, you know, facing somebody who's got real issues. But similarly, bosses in the workplace are also, well, some might say over-generous in this one, because they're also scared of HR, they're scared of insulting somebody, they're scared of a court case that might happen if they somehow... And mental health has become such a big thing. Bearing in mind we've just reached the stage of now finally understanding it, the last thing any boss wants to do is to not understand it.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's absolutely right. I think there's two solutions to that. There's the one that's above the level of the boss, you know, as a societal level. We maybe have to think about this conversation we've had about mental health and said that, you know, everyone opening up and we should all talk about our mental health problems, especially among men. I think some people would make an argument that we've gone too far there and it's maybe made it worse. In terms of what you do as an employer, again, it's what your last guest said. It's obviously no employer, or very few employers, are going to be brave enough to turn around and say, oh, no, actually, you're a bit stressed, you're a bit anxious, come on now, I'm not granting you the sick day, come into work. Yeah. No employer is going to do that. But if we present the case that work is in itself a treatment, you know, for the reason I outlined, that work, you know, makes you happier because you're among people, because you're distracted, then that's a way that doctors and GPs can help this problem, because they can say, you know what, I'm prescribing you work. Yeah. Not because, you know, I want you to go away and do hard labour, because it's actually going to be good for you. And if GPs and then HR, etc., can make that argument, I think that's maybe one of the ways we tackle this problem, but I wouldn't say it's an easy thing to fix.
No, it certainly isn't an easy thing to fix. I think I am confident enough to say, bearing I'm not a doctor, I'm not a boss in that respect, so I think I can say it. I don't think most people do have a mental health crisis. I think some are just having maybe either a bad period or a run of bad luck, if that makes sense. And I can't qualify that. I know I can't qualify that, Michael, but there is that real sense that we have completely overdiagnosed an entire nation here.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, again, I wish I had a study to back this up. I don't, but I certainly get a sense just from speaking to people through my work as a journalist, but also just my friendship group, that I think whilst there was definitely a problem, again, especially among men, of bottling things up, And it's good that people now talk about their issues.
Sure.
I do think that goes to another end, especially among younger people, where actually you can talk about stuff so much that you work yourself up even more. And we forget like how powerful distraction is. And I think we just need to learn that lesson again. That look, if like you are not feeling brilliant, one of the best things you can do is distract yourself, whether that's by going to work or going to the gym or whatever. And I think we just have to get away from being afraid to that might be the wrong thing to say. It's like clearly we can't go on like this. Not just for forget the economics of this. It's clearly terrible for the economy, but it's also a human tragedy, right? We can't
100%.
just be all languishing at home.
100%. Michael, that's great. Thank you, sir, for that. Michael Simmons, economics editor at The Spectator. In fact, echoing that point, Stacey says, I was off sick once, feeling really depressed after my partner left me when I was pregnant. The sales director called me and asked how I was doing. He then said, please don't sit at home on your own. We're all here for you. You don't have to do too much work, but just come back and we'll look after you. He was totally right. I went back. So lucky to have worked for a caring company. Yeah, there's something in that as well. I just think people now like doing nothing. I think some people kind of like that, and they genuinely see like life being tricky. Particularly, there is a cost of living thing. There is trying to get on the property ladder thing. I mean, I get all of that. And some of that is quite overwhelming. And when you can't, there was a time when you were 15 or something, you go, I'm not meant to afford a house, I'm 15 for God's sake. But when you're 30, 35 and you can't afford one, I can see why that might start to eat in to your kind of head, as it were, a bit. But I don't think everybody's in that position. So yeah, there is a mental health thing. Have we overdiagnosed? Without any doubt, we've overdiagnosed. You saw the figures there for yourself. 5 million, this is a surge of 5 million days in just a year, with a record 20.5 million days lost to stress, anxiety and depression in the last year, 2024. I mean, that's just extraordinary, right? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
The whole class was being punished for the sins of the one, which we're told not to do that in teacher training college.
Yes, well, as a teacher yourself, exactly.
Yeah, it did seem that the underlying issue here was not so much the inclusivity, but the fact that the girls have been rolling up the skirts. But girls have always done that, and it's the job of teachers to always say, roll them down.
Everyone at my school, I went to a single-sex school, so, and you didn't bother rolling your skirt up during the school hours. The moment we got on that bus, you rolled them up.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Steve in Cumbria says, afternoon, Ian, something I've heard many times in the NHS, you don't want to waste valuable sick days being ill. Yeah, I hear it. This comes in from Chris in Manchester. How you doing, Chris?
Hello there.
Hello. You wanted to pick up on this very point.
I did. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're loud and clear. What are you thinking?
Got me on a good day, actually, but I've tried a few times in the past to get through to Julia Harley-Brewer in the morning, speaking of the same issue. I, for many years, have been, well, ultimately an extremely successful entrepreneur. I've employed hundreds, if not thousands of people. A few years ago, my mental health spiraled down. Now, I can say I've suffered depression and anxiety all my life, but understanding what true anxiety and panic attacks, etc., are, I can honestly look back and say it wasn't even on the same scale. It was a different, inverted commas, disease. When you wake up in the morning and your anxiety is so extreme, you can't even get out of bed. You just want to sleep. You don't want to open your eyes and get up. Not because I'm not a lazy person. I've worked day and night all my life. But when I say having a panic attack or having extreme anxiety, the only analogy I've ever come up with, and people who have been through the same have confirmed it, is it's like waking up in a coffin, knowing that the lid is closed and knowing you have to remain calm. That's a true panic attack. It is the most horrendous experience, something I never thought the human body could do. I've endured that for the last 5 months. What I would say is... When you say you've endured that, is that, are these episodic? So, you know, you'll have moments of the day when it's fine and then you'll have one of these things. How regularly does this happen, Chris? It's quite regular. At the moment, it's daily. It can go away for a couple of weeks and I can live some life. What it boils down to more and more, and I've been on a long health journey for a number of years, is it's not just feeling a bit sad and a little bit overwhelmed with work issues or private issues. It's down to chemical imbalances, but not those that most GPs, I would say, would remark on. A lot of it is down to things like mineral balance, to good diet. Now, yes, I have a good diet now, but my adrenal glands, the glands that control and are in communication with the pituitary gland in the head, the ones that are making the GABA that control the mood, the serotonin, the dopamine, once the adrenal glands are burnt out, and this happens typically with entrepreneurs, I know a number, but when the adrenals stop working or minimally function, all those chemical pathways stop and it knocks on. It is a true imbalance. But what is hardest in medicine, certainly in true medicine, is not looking for tablets to solve something, but trying to understand what the root cause is.
Yeah, of course.
Is going back to the most basic things in life. If a plant is poorly, you put some potash on it, some minerals, some potassium, etc. And lo and behold, in a few days, that little baby tree is thriving. We are just the same. And if we don't have those essential minerals and we don't get them in our current diet, I mean, even my diet now, when I try with organic, with everything, it's very difficult to get enough potassium, to get enough magnesium. Nearly everybody's depleted in these absolutely key, the sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. Nearly everybody is depleted in them just because of the modern diet. And stress ultimately raises cortisol. Cortisol turns everything off. It puts you in a fight or flight.
Yeah.
And if you're in a fight or flight facing the lion that's about to eat you, all the functions in your body that aren't essential to slay that lion and win are shut down.
Yep. So
stress, continued stress, is probably one of the biggest driving factors in mental health. And also, I think, trauma, especially childhood trauma.
Sure. And this can, for some people, I mean, this can just pop up out of nowhere, right? I mean, to coin a phrase.
Yeah, I just like Julia in the past, I've employed many, many people, and I look back and think, I've been rotten. I'm a very kind person, a very loving, caring person, but I've never understood it. And I know you don't understand it from the little bits I heard whilst I was waiting on the phone. And certainly from what Julia said, Julia's view is pull yourself together. That's always been my view. I'm not knocking her. And until you experience it, it's hard to even describe. That coffin analogy, however morbid, however awful, is so exact. It's really...
Yeah, it's quite horrid. Just hearing you say it sounds horrifying.
It's horrendous. It truly is. So it can come and go. With me, I'd never had a panic attack. I just thought there was some wussy little tantrum that people have, when you get a little bit overwhelmed.
Well, there are. I mean, again, this is where it comes down to the difficulty of living in the kind of age we're living in, where you can't. Firstly, you can't prove somebody isn't having a panic attack when they say they are. But there might be people who aren't having a panic attack. They're just having a pretty bad moment. They're feeling a bit anxious and it's, they're a bit breathy, but they're not having the coffin feeling that you've just talked about. But we'll describe it as a panic attack in the same way some people describe a bit of gentle anxiety or stress as depression.
Exactly. And I think you've hit the nail on the head here because, everything's on a scale. A full panic attack like I had, which lasted 4 days, I didn't eat for 4 days.
4 days of feeling like that.
You can't imagine what that 4 days was. But there's a whole spectrum between that and between mild anxiety. Yep. Anxiety and panic attacks are separate. They are completely different things, but they do overlap to some extent. One can induce the other.
Sure.
And once you're trying to get through panic attacks and come out the other end, your biggest fear, and mine now, is a panic attack.
Of course it is.
Now, what I do want to share, the last thing I do want to share with you, what has truly helped me, the last time I went running, I was late to the school bus 40 years ago. That was, all I've done all my life is work, genuinely. Yeah. And 2 people told me, write a journal, Chris, gratitude, things that you're happy for, things that are going well, things that you're thankful for. And also, get this app, Couch to 5K. It's a running app. Like I said, I didn't even own running shoes. When I was waking in the morning, I was, for a period of many weeks, the anxiety was beyond, it was 11 on a scale of 10. It was beyond palatable. And, I couldn't even face getting dressed and showered. What I had to do, and everybody told me, get outside and feel the sun. Now, that's not always easy, especially when they're looking at it in the sun. But what did help me hugely was getting some running shoes.
Started running.
And started running.
Yeah.
And I'm no great runner. I'm only on 3.5 to 4K now out of the 5K, but that's 3.5K more than I was doing.
And it's a lot more than the national average, which is probably 0.
Probably. But the key thing, and I've worked with, I had a medical company, and, one of our guys, he always used to go to the gym at 6 a.m. and come and work at 7:30, and, I couldn't work if I've not been to the gym. And I thought there was something wrong with him. I thought, how peculiar, I'm here to work. Yeah. And I was running probably the second week, and I looked around me just to check there was nobody around me.
Sure.
And I had little earphones in and some music playing and the running app on. And I remember looking around me, there's nobody around, and I flung my arms around like God knows what and sang. And I felt on top of the world. And that was the endorphins coming. And most people listening that are suffering will probably think, it won't work for me.
Yeah.
Try it. Well, if you can't run, walk.
There it is. Listen, Chris, it's a very powerful story and brilliantly told. And I'm glad you are enjoying at least this moment, this period of being up rather than down. And I hope that continues. Thank you, Chris, in Manchester. The one thing I always, the running thing I find, the little endorphins, I've never had it. Maybe I don't run enough, but, I've been enough to the gym, couple of K here, couple of K there. Never had that euphoric moment to just do more of it. Like, well, come on your 4th kilometre. Really? Apparently everybody gets it. You know, people go, "Oh, I feel amazing." Woman down up, well, a mate of ours, she's like, "Yeah, you got to come out with me." She says she runs with her dog. You know, people who attach their dog to their waist. She's you know, that's enough to put me off. She should be in jail, and I told her so. Poor dog's got to run with it. The dog doesn't give a hoot about endorphins. And they go off forever. She says it's the most amazing game changer. And Chris there, echoing that. I just haven't got it, experienced it. Maybe I don't need it. Maybe I'm just a happy old soul most of the time. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 25 to 4. I think, is it Alex Phillips? I think coming up at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Alex Phillips is in the big hot seat at 4, freshly baptised. And I say that with full admiration and joy for her experience. What does it mean to the on-air Alex? Is there a new dimension? I'll ask her all of them. I'm genuinely interested in that. We'll talk to her a little later before she's on air. And this story as well. I think a lot of people will be really almost delighted, over the moon to see this, wondering when it's going to happen over here. Donald Trump signing a sweeping travel ban that bars entry to so far 12 countries, including Afghanistan and Iran. There are some exceptions for dual nationals and athletes travelling for major sporting events, but broadly that's how it is. He said the decision was taken over concerns about national security. Let's speak to our man Michael Graham, US political commentator and managing editor at Inside Sources. Michael, good afternoon to you. When I first saw this, of course, I thought, hang on a second, this was the old Trump back in the day, wasn't it, before he was elected in 2016 when he was saying, look, this is what I will look at doing. He didn't get around to doing it at the time, but he's now back.
Well, he is, and part of it is response to the horrific attack by an illegal immigrant from Egypt who, committed that horrific, attack with improvised flamethrower, water bottles of gas, whatever it was. Some of us are just disappointed that Scotland wasn't on the list. How'd they miss it? You keep the Scotch out if we possibly can. And it's one of the areas where Donald Trump is winning. And I also think it's feeding another story. The CNN over here, which is a left, media outlet, their pollster did a big rant earlier this week where he was looking at how the two parties compare in the U.S. And he was outraged that Republicans still have a double-digit lead on the issue of the economy. Look at what's going on with the tariffs and everything. How can you be losing to this guy, you know? But then he got to the profound question, and this is relevant to your two parties. In the U.S., the Democratic Party, you know, our version of the Labor Party, has always been the party of the middle class. And the Republicans are the party of whatever, you know, the ownership class, maybe the professional class, the white-collar class. And in 1989, right after Reagan, Democrats had I think it was a 23-point lead. And then he showed how it's steadily gone down. And with Trump, now they are tied. The Republican and Democratic Party are tied for the working class vote. If that stays in place, Democrats will not win another election.
No.
Because they don't have voters to replace all. First of all, it's the biggest group. There are obviously more working class people than there are professional class, and that's, I think it's because of things like this. Of, you know, you go to the academic pinhead types, you go to the people who admire the United Nations types. They say, well, you can't do a ban on a country. You can't say people from Eritrea or Haiti or whatever. You just can't do that. That might involve brown people, or it might whatever. And normal people just go, what the heck are we doing letting people in from these countries in the first place?
Sure.
There's real problems. And whether it's the right policy or not, it's a policy that resonates with those voters that Democrats are already losing. And when Democrats attack it, for example, the Trump administration is deporting the family of the Egyptian terrorist. And we have prominent Democrats in the United States who are attacking the Trump administration for this. I'm like, you guys are idiots. First of all, they're here illegally, so you don't get to stay. Sorry. And second of all, why do you keep being on the side of the gang member who was wrongly sent to El Salvador? Yes, it was a screw up. Yes, he should be treated fairly. I agree with that. But why are you out acting like he's a hero who's been harmed? Why are you defending the family of this guy who literally set Jews on fire? And this is part of the ongoing brand problem that the American left has.
And the stranger, you're absolutely bang on, and you're right to wonder about where the heck the Democrats can end up, who's going to be voting for them. But I just think with this, we're living in a world where this isn't even hard to understand. I don't think you need to be a Democrat, a Republican, a Tory or a Labour member to understand there's some pretty bad places out there. Their regimes are medieval. There are death cults running the place. Look at what's happening with Hamas and places like that. The Taliban over there in Afghanistan, North Pakistan. You could look at Iran and, of course, the horrors of what happens there. Even Egypt once, and, you know, it's never been fully liberal, but, you know, it's got perhaps more stringent. Turkey, those kind of countries, you know, areas that really do have a very different idea about how the world should look, a worldview that isn't just a few political nuances, but seismic differences in how, you know, human life should progress. I don't see there's anything controversial about saying maybe some of those countries we're going to just put a little bit of a ban on for a bit, just to we'll see what happens.
So now let's look at it from the other side. Why does it matter if America has a ban on these 11 countries? Why is losing immigrants from Yemen really going to cause a problem? The answer, of course, is no, because billions, literally billions of people want to come to the United States. Why? Because it's a country that rocks. I would say the same thing for the UK. People they get on rafts to try to come to the UK because it's a country that rocks. Why start with the premise that we have no right to control our borders and flip it around to, we've got something great. People want to live in our countries. Let's pick the best and brightest. Let's have maybe an income minimum. You can't come here unless you have a certain, or a skill minimum. If you have a certain skill we need, then let's have a you're friends of ours against China or Russia deal. You know, hey, you're the European countries that are helping us fight China. So in other words, not Hungary. I mean, fight Russia. So Hungarians are in the back of the line and Poles are in the front of the line. You know, there's all kinds of things you can do to advance cause. If you start with the premise that I live in a great country, people would be lucky to live in the country I live in. And so we're going to use that. It's kind of the immigration version of Trump's tariff model. You know, he points out our economy is so big, we can afford to be bullies. I don't want to be a bully. I think I'm more of a let's lower the tariffs, let everybody prosper. I want Mexico to get rich. I want the UK to get rich. I think more rich people is a better thing. But set the premise, you can understand it. You're right. The American economy is the biggest in the world. We have something other countries want. Why can't we act that way about our sovereignty too? A lot of good policies can come out of it.
Yeah, and America, a country that was built on, so many different backgrounds and people, would embrace that. You know, the land where you can be what you want to be, the entrepreneur is encouraged. If somebody comes from Yemen and they tick all the right boxes and they're here to contribute and advance and explore and, innovate, all that, America would be the first country to say, yeah, come on in, guys.
Yeah, but the fact is there are a lot of other countries in the Middle East and in South America and in Asia who don't have these lingering problems like Afghanistan does. And so, once again, if we were running short of people, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We got the table set for 12 and there's only 8, but we don't have that problem. So why not? What's the downside? Like I said, I would like to see immigration focused more on what is the best outcome for my country? What is the best outcome for your country? That seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely right. While you're with us, Michael, bound to ask you as well, a couple of other bits. The US has told the United Kingdom it must spend 5% of its GDP on defence. We've been speaking a lot about this. I mean, it's fair to say Trump's had some success in saying to other countries, you've got to step up to the plate here, guys. NATO and Lord knows who else. You've been, frankly, remiss in your contribution. America's been bailing you out, or has always been standing there in the wings to bail you out. You've known it, so you haven't put your hand in your pocket. Times are going to change.
And, I'm a big supporter of helping Ukraine, arming Ukraine, putting weapons in their hands. I'm an old-fashioned Republican. I believe that the party exists for 2 reasons: cut taxes and kill commies. And so I would definitely want to see Ukraine just rock and roll. But one of the arguments that I get is, if this really is so important, if Russia is an existential threat to order in Europe, if it could break Europe for Russia to advance, why won't these countries that want us to do something at least, put in the minimum bid to be in the game? And I think, in all seriousness, when Germany and the UK and France in particular show the Americans that they are serious about doing their part, it'll be an easier sell to get America to contribute more.
Yeah. Did you say Germany? Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's perfect. I mean, they let their military collapse. I saw some horrifying numbers about 2 months ago. Like half of their military was capable of deployment. Half. Yeah. It was just ridiculous. So not only are they not spending the raw dollars, they're not doing what they need to do. And of course, as long as they keep buying energy from Europe, this is the thing. And I don't understand this on both sides of the pond, as you say.
Sure.
America is awash in natural gas, where the area of Pennsylvania alone, out in that key swing state, is the 4th largest supply. Why don't we have just a steady convoy of ships from the American East Coast to Europe to basically, cut off the market for Russia? Just say, look, we're gonna give you such a steady pipeline. You can, on our end, you can turn theirs off, because if Russia loses its gas station status, it can't afford its military. And what's funny? Democrats in the U.S. won't back it because it involves evil fossil fuels, and Europeans won't back it because they want, green energy, and they're shutting down their nukes. So I don't know what the heck.
Yeah. And by the way, on the German military, what does really mark them out is the only military that has a work from home policy. You can see where the problems lie. Listen, Michael, always good to have you with us. Michael Graham, our man on Capitol Hill, always telling it like it is. Thoughts on that and all the other areas. We've got loads of calls still to get through. We'll try and get through as much as we can in the next section. Alex Phillips is going to join us to tell us what is happening on Drive this afternoon. Right now, just gone 3:45. This is Talk.
Betty had found out that she wasn't going to get the £300 winter fuel allowance that she relied on to keep her home warm and to heat herself through the cold months. So you went round, as you did every day, and you found her literally frozen to death. Unbelievable.
Dharma said about the last government, before he got in, that Tories would say that there's 4,000 people going to die of the cold this winter. Well, he's beat that target by 4,950.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This came in from Elle. He says, my partner spent 27,000 quid on a ground source heat pump. It doesn't work, and he mainly relies on his oil again. And it's all those different kind of stories are out there. John's in Norfolk on ye old heat pumps. John, what are you making of this technology?
Good afternoon, Ian. Good to speak with you.
You too.
Yeah, I moved into a brand new property 14 years ago, which was built with an air source heat pump installed. So it was an ideal installation. It had got all the insulation under the floor. It got underfloor heating, good thermal performance for the whole building.
Sure.
And it was incredibly expensive to run. I've just recently moved, and I'm fortunate now that I'm back on gas, which is great. But what your first caller mentioned about the coefficient of it working at 3-to-1, so for every kilowatt of energy you use, you get 3 kilowatts of heat. But that only actually works in the summer, when, believe it or not, you don't need your heating on. So in the winter, when you need your heating on,
that's the struggle.
Is probably about equal, so 1-to-1. Now, interestingly, if you run on gas and a gas boiler, the efficiency on a gas boiler is over 90% now. So my gas, I currently pay 6 pence a unit, and I pay 24p a unit for electricity. So my electricity is 4 times the cost of gas. So even when the heat pump is at its absolute prime, it's still more expensive than gas. And in the winter, it will be 4 times.
And that wasn't meant to be the direction of travel for this, was it? I mean, it was meant to be, okay, you can embrace a new technology. You can say, all right, the outlay might be a little, tricky, but, once we've done it, don't worry, it's going to be cheaper. If it's not cheaper, then there's nothing good has come of this.
I honestly don't know how it's got the legs that it's got, because I would have thought it would have sunk.
Because Ed Miliband is treating it like a religion, John. That's what's happened.
I know, the guy's totally mad.
He is literally the vicar of heat pumps, and there's the problem. Listen, John, I'm going to move on just to get more comments on before the news. Thank you for that. Sarah is in Cornwall on the heat pumps. Are you going to defend the heat pumps, Sarah? Good afternoon to you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon to you, Ian.
Fire away.
Speak to you. Yes, we had an oil boiler before.
Yep.
Which was costing us. We were spending around about £500 a quarter.
Got it.
And it was
so 2,000 quid a year, basically, which is a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous, and also it didn't. We couldn't afford to have it on all the time. So the house wasn't comfortable, and I looked into this. There was a scheme, a government scheme, back in must have been sort of January last January, before Labour came in.
Yep.
And they basically paid for everything.
Wow.
So we had 14 solar panels.
They paid for everything. You didn't have to contribute a thing.
No, and it was about 40 grand's worth of work.
And I think these... How long ago was this, did you say, Sarah?
So this was under the Conservative government. It was their scheme. So
I think it's gone now, hasn't it? I think it's
that has gone, absolutely.
Yeah, they don't do that anymore. So you got the full kit and caboodle, and now it's costing you nothing.
And it's absolutely fantastic.
Even the heat pump?
Yeah, the air source heat pump is great. They put extra radiators. We had a new radiators put in as well, and the way that it works is just that it's just on low constantly. It doesn't get hot. The radiator doesn't get, but it just lets sort of off a gentle heat. And compared to, I think the thing is, if you've had a gas boiler previously, and you've changed over, I think it might not work as well for you. But if you have had the solar panels and you've had oil, which that boiler was just horrendously noisy, and this one works absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was about. Because we both work, but on universal credit, and because we were on universal credit, we were able to claim, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that we weren't going to have to contribute anything, and I made them put it in writing.
Yes.
but no,
you've got it. And that you live to tell the tale. Listen, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed. With a good news story on a heat pump. But then she did have it all paid for her back in the day when they were saying, you can get all this stuff for free. Hello, Alex Phillips. Are you all right? You're right there, love. What's happened?
Oh, no, sorry,
I just sent you a text asking you if you were coming in for a handover. So
you
probably won't have got it yet. That's all right. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
somebody had to. So, listen, how are you?
I'm all right, yeah.
Congratulations. Is that the right word on your baptism? I was about to say baptism of fire, baptism of water.
Baptism of water, as it should be.
Yeah. You genuinely look different.
Well, there you go. I've got the Holy Spirit with me.
You got angel. You got wings coming out your
halo.
back. A halo.
There we
Hey.
go.
Where was that, by the way?
That was in the sea in Eastbourne.
It was Eastbourne.
Yeah.
Ever you're going to go for a baptism, Eastbourne's your place.
Yeah, and you know that before you're baptised, the priest blesses the water that you're baptised in. So there was a moment on Monday that the English Channel was blessed.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've seen all the memes.
Holy water.
You know how this works in this modern age.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's all right. Listen, big show, busy show. I've noticed there's a massive industrious team you've got working out there today. That means you've got some special stuff coming up.
Well, I have, and do you know what? We know that basically Sir Keir Starmer's going to put forward this idea that we can tinker around with the ECHR, we can get exceptions, we can say, let's disapply Article 8. It's not his idea, Ian. He's nicked it.
What?
He's nicked it. Because Italy and Denmark have already signed a letter saying that they want to do this and are encouraging other countries such as Hungary, Poland, Finland, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic to all do the same. And so rather than come up with his own policy, he's just coattailing on that. And the stupid thing is these countries are part of the